The last words my sister ever spoke to me over the radio were my own words, given back to me in her voice 4 seconds after I said them. I know what you are thinking. Bad signal, a delay, an echo bouncing off the granite walls of the valley. I told myself the same thing, standing alone in a ranger station in the North Cascades, watching the afternoon light dim 3 hours before sunset. But here is the thing about echoes. An echo does not pause. An echo does not think about what you said before it answers. And an echo has never, not once in the history of sound, asked me a question back. Before we go any further, I want to know where you are right now. Drop your city and your local time in the comments, because the story you are about to hear depends on light, on the exact hour the sun gives up on the mountains, and I want to know how much daylight you have left wherever you are sitting. If it is already night where you are, lock the door. If it is still bright outside, pay attention to the shadows while you listen. Notice which way they point. You will understand why soon enough. This is a long one, so get comfortable, lower the volume of everything else in your life, and let me tell you what happened to my sister and me in the high country of Washington State. There is a lie that every human being carries into the wilderness, and it is this: that the wild is glad to see us. We step off the pavement and onto the trail, and something ancient in our chest unclenches. The air tastes washed. The trees stand around us like patient relatives. We breathe deeper, walk slower, and we mistake all of that comfort for a welcome. We assume the forest opened a door for us, when the truth is that the forest simply did not bother to close one. There is a difference between being invited and being tolerated, and most people never live long enough in the high country to learn it, because the mountains do not perform for us. The light that falls through the canopy at 4 in the afternoon, gold and slanted and impossibly gentle, was falling exactly that way for 10,000 years before the first boot print, and it will fall that way for 10,000 years after the last one. We are not the audience the wilderness dresses up for. We are a brief warmth passing through a country that measures time in glaciers, and everything we feel out there, the peace, the awe, the smallness, is just the sensation of being unimportant in a place that is honest about it. People think the danger of the wild is teeth, bears, cougars, cold, falling rock. Those things are real, but they are negotiable. You can carry spray, carry layers, check your footing. What is not negotiable is the assumption underneath every step you take out there, the assumption you do not even know you are making, that the world will keep behaving, that water runs downhill, that an echo comes back faithful, that the sun goes down once per day, at the hour the almanac promised, and not a minute before. My older sister spent 9 seasons as a forest ranger in the North Cascades, and she only ever gave me one piece of advice about her mountains. She said it the first night I stayed with her, while she cleaned a coffee pot that had not been truly cleaned since the Clinton administration. She said, "Trust the light. The light is the only thing up here that has never lied to anybody. The day the light stops behaving, stop trusting everything else." I thought it was poetry. Ranger wisdom, the kind of thing they print on postcards in the visitor center. It was not poetry. It was a survival instruction. And by the time I understood that, I was already inside the worst night of my life, watching the sun set at 2 in the afternoon while something wearing my sister's voice asked me, very politely, to open the door. I should tell you how I ended up there. My sister Ingrid is 6 years older than me, which means that for most of my childhood she was less a sibling and more a third parent, one who confiscated my candy and taught me to drive in empty parking lots. Then I turned 18. She took a seasonal position with the Forest Service, and the distance between us stopped being measured in years and started being measured in miles. 2,000 of them, roughly, between my apartment in Ohio and the duty station she worked out of, a timber outpost above a lake whose name I am not going to give you, in the Glacier Peak country of the North Cascades. We talked maybe 4 times a year. Birthdays, Christmas, the occasional photo of a marmot with no caption. So when she called me in late September and said, "Come out before the snow closes the road. I want you to see this place while I am still here," I heard 2 things in her voice. The first was an invitation. The second was something underneath the invitation, a tiredness, a wanting not to be alone that Ingrid had never once admitted to in her entire life. I flew into Seattle, rented a car I could not afford, and drove east until the pavement gave up. The last 40 minutes were gravel, switchbacking through old growth so tall the afternoon felt like evening, my headlights sweeping across trunks wider than the car. When I finally pulled into the clearing, the station was smaller than I expected. One room of weathered cedar on a stone foundation, a steel roof streaked with rust and needles, a radio mast, a woodshed, and a hand-painted sign by the steps that read Station 4. And under it, in newer paint, "Please sign the board." Ingrid came out before I had the engine off. She looked older. Not aged exactly. Weathered, the way the sign was weathered, like the place had been working on her. She hugged me hard enough to bruise, held me at arm's length, and the first complete sentence my sister said to me after 14 months apart was not hello. It was, "Did you pass anybody on the road up?" I said no. "Just a logging truck near the highway. Nobody walking," she said. "Nobody standing in the trees." I laughed. She did not. Then the moment folded itself away, and she smiled, and she was Ingrid again, dragging my duffel inside and complaining about how little I had packed for mountain weather. The station was one room and a loft. A desk with the radio set, a wood stove, a cot, a wall of topographic maps gone soft at the folds, and a corkboard buried under paper. Incident reports. That is how you learn what a ranger actually does, by the way. Not from a job description, but from the corkboard. Hiker overdue. Trail 9, resolved. Vehicle abandoned. Forest Road 27, towed. Campfire violation, Bench Lake, citation issued. Wildlife report, unverified, filed. A whole season of small emergencies pinned in layers, and my sister's initials at the bottom of every page. She had not told me she was the only permanent body for 30 miles. The corkboard told me. That first evening was the good part, and I want you to have it, because everything after is going to take it away. We ate chili out of dented bowls. She showed me on the map where she had seen a wolverine in June, the first confirmed in that drainage in decades. The light came through the west window in a long gold bar that crawled across the floorboards as the sun went down, and Ingrid watched it the way other people watch television, habitually, without seeming to. At some point I asked the question I had been carrying for 2,000 miles. "Why did you really ask me to come?" Ingrid was quiet for a while. Then she got up, went to the desk, and took a laminated card off a nail beside the radio. The lamination was yellowed, and the corners were furred with age, and the writing under the plastic was handwritten, more than one handwriting. Some lines in faded blue ballpoint and others in fresher black, like the card had been added to across many years by many hands. "House rules," she said. "Every station in this district has a copy. You are going to read them, and you are not going to do the thing you are about to do." "What thing?" "The eyebrow thing," she said. "Read." I read. "I am going to give them to you exactly as they were written, because I have the card. I took it when everything was over, and it is sitting on my desk right now, and some nights I read it the way other people read scripture. 1. Sign the board when you leave and when you return, even if you are alone. Especially if you are alone. 2. If someone asks you a question and you did not hear it clearly, do not answer. Do not ask them to repeat it. Walk away. 3. If you smell wood smoke and no fire has been reported, do not search for the source. Log the time and stay inside. 4. Trail 9 has 11 switchbacks. Count them every time. If you count 12, turn around and count again on the way down. Do not continue upward on a 12th switchback. 5. Do not hum, sing, or recite anything out loud on the trails after sundown. 6. The radio will sometimes click 3 times on the open channel. It is not a person. Do not click back. 7. The trail crew for this district was disbanded in 1987. Anyone you meet wearing an orange vest is not trail crew. 8. If the daylight begins to fail before 5 in the afternoon, look at the shadows. If the shadows point uphill, that is a second dusk. Stop whatever you are doing, walk to the nearest station and stay there until true morning. Walk. Do not run. I read the card twice. Then I did the eyebrow thing. Ingrid sighed and sat back down across from me. Outside, the gold bar of light had gone copper, then gray. She turned the lamp on, and I noticed that she checked her watch when she did it, and seemed satisfied by what she saw. "Most of it is practical," she said. "The sign-out board is how they find your body if you break a leg. The singing rule keeps you quiet enough to hear what is moving near you. The wood smoke rule, Half the time it really is an illegal campfire, and you do not want to walk into some armed lunatics' camp alone at night. And the other half of the time, I asked. The other half of the time there is no campfire, she said. There is no camp. There is just the smell, moving along the trail at walking speed, and you do not want to know what is carrying it. I waited for her to laugh. She picked at the label of her bottle instead. What is a second dusk, I said. And my sister, who once removed a fishhook from her own forearm with pliers and narrated the procedure to me over the phone in a voice flat enough to iron a shirt on, took a long breath before she answered. You know how dusk works, she said. The sun drops, the light goes long and gold, then blue, then it is gone. It is the most reliable event in the world. You could set a watch by it for 1,000,000 years and never be wrong. Now imagine you are out on a trail at 2 in the afternoon, full daylight, and the light starts to go, not clouds. Clouds make the light flat and gray. This is dusk light, gold turning blue, the whole performance, hours early. The birds go quiet because birds believe what the light tells them. The temperature falls off a cliff, and if you look down at your own shadow, it is pointing the wrong way. Uphill, toward the high country. No matter where the sun should be, every shadow on that mountainside leans uphill, like the whole forest is being lit by something below it. That is not possible, I said. She nodded slowly, the way you nod at a child who has just informed you that thunder is not possible. That is correct, she said. It is not possible. It happens anyway. Old-timers in the district called it the second dusk because the real one still comes later, at the proper hour, like nothing happened. 2 sunsets in one day, and everything that lives up here knows the difference, except people. What happens during it? People get lost, she said. That is the official version, and it is even true. Visibility drops, hikers panic, they leave the trail, but the ones who come back, and most of them do come back, Theo. I want to be clear that almost everybody comes back. The ones who come back all say a version of the same thing. They say the trail was longer than it should have been. They say they passed the same boulder 4 times. They say they heard the people they came with calling to them from up the slope, even when the people they came with were standing right next to them. And the ones who do not come back, I said. The lamp hummed. Outside the window there was nothing but a blue so deep it was almost a texture. We find their packs, Ingrid said. We find their packs sitting in the middle of the trail with the straps still buckled, like the person inside them was subtracted. In 9 years I have carried 4 packs down this mountain. I can tell you the weight of every one of them. Then she stood up, rinsed her bowl, and said it was time to sleep because she had a patrol at 6, and the conversation was over in the way that conversations with Ingrid ended, suddenly and by decree. But as I lay on the cot listening to the stove tick, I understood the second thing in her voice on the phone, the wanting not to be alone. My sister had spent 9 seasons being the person other people radioed when the light went wrong. There was nobody for her to radio. There was only a laminated card, and a corkboard, and a little brother 2,000 miles away who still thought the wilderness was glad to see him. The call came on my 3rd night. The first 2 days had been almost normal. We hiked to a fire lookout. I took pictures of the larches turning gold along the high basins and got mildly famous in our family group chat. Ingrid relaxed by degrees, and I caught glimpses of the sister from the empty parking lots, the one who laughed with her whole chest. I had nearly filed the rules card under regional folklore, the way you file away a hotel's evacuation map. Then, a little after 9 on the 3rd night, the radio on the desk woke up. Station 4, this is Marisol at the trailhead, you copy. Ingrid crossed the room before the transmission ended. Marisol ran the seasonal booth down at the trailhead, 11 miles below us by road. Her voice had the careful steadiness of somebody reading from notes so they would not have to think about what the notes said. Go for Station 4, Ingrid said. We have an overdue, Marisol said. Day hiker, solo, signed the trailhead register at 7 this morning for Bench Lake and back. Vehicle is still in the lot. Name on the register is Walsh, W-A-L-S-H. No overnight gear indicated. Ingrid's eyes went to the window, to the black square of it, and I watched her do the math every ranger does. Bench Lake and back was 9 miles round trip. Nobody takes 14 hours to hike 9 miles, not vertically anyway. Copy, she said. Which trail did Walsh indicate? A pause. The radio hissed gently. like the mountain breathing through it. 9, Marisol said. Trail 9. I watched my sister close her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she was motion. Boots, pack, headlamp, the big handheld spotlight off its charger, a thermal blanket. The first aid kit the size of a briefcase. She talked while she packed, and her voice had gone flat and procedural, the fishhook voice. Here is what is going to happen, she said. Ruth is the volunteer steward camped at the Bench Lake Junction. She will start down the trail from the top, I will start up from the bottom, and we will squeeze whoever this is between us. Standard overdue. 9 times out of 10 they sprained an ankle, and they are sitting on a log feeling stupid. I am coming with you, I said. You absolutely are not, she said. You are staying here, on this radio, being my relay, because the trailhead cannot always hear Ruth and I need a middle ear. That is a real job, and I am not inventing it to park you somewhere. She pulled the laminated card off its nail and pressed it into my hand. Rules 6 and 3 are the ones that matter inside this station. The radio clicks, you do not click back. You smell smoke, you log the time and you stay inside. You do not open this door for anybody but me. And Theo, look at me. I am going to knock 4, then 2, 4, then 2. Anything else, any other rhythm, you sit quiet and you wait. Why would anybody else knock? I said. She zipped the pack shut. For a moment I thought she was not going to answer. Because the overdue is on Trail 9, she said. And it is after sundown, and some nights this mountain does not send people back in the same order it took them. 4, then 2. Then she signed the board by the door. Out, in grid, 2140, Dest Trail 9. And the night swallowed her headlamp before it had gone 50 meters, and I was alone in a one-room station with a radio, a stove, and a list of rules I had stopped filing under folklore. Now, before I tell you what came out of that radio, I need 10 seconds of your time. Because statistically most of you listening right now have not yet pressed the like button, and I will tell you why that matters tonight of all nights. The next part of this story is the part 1 have never told anybody, and if your thumb finds that button now, while the lights in my story are still on, you will not have to move when it gets to the part where they go out. Do it now. Good, stay with me. The first hour was procedure. Ingrid called positions every 15 minutes. Switchback 2, switchback 4, and I relayed them down to Marisol. Ruth's voice came through occasionally from above, older, dry as kindling, calling Walsh's name into the timber. Routine traffic on a cold frequency. I even made coffee at 2312. The radio clicked 3 times. I want to describe this precisely, because precision is all I have. It was not static. Static is fuzzy, organic, a crowd sound. These were clicks. Clean and deliberate. The sound the transmit button itself makes when a thumb presses it and releases it without speaking. Click. Click. Evenly spaced, maybe a half second apart. The sound of somebody on this frequency, somewhere out in all that lightless country, keying a microphone 3 times and saying nothing. My hand was already moving toward the handset. That is the thing the rule writers understood about human beings, I think. It is instinct. Somebody knocks, you knock back. Somebody keys a radio, you key yours. Just to say, I hear you. Are you in trouble? My thumb was on the button, actually resting on the cool plastic of it, when the lamplight caught the card lying on the desk. 6. It is not a person. Do not click back. I took my thumb off the button and put my hand in my lap like it was a pet that had misbehaved. The clicks came again. 3 of them. Then, after a minute, 3 more. And I realized with a sensation like cold water finding the back of my collar that they were getting louder. Not louder in volume, closer in presence. The first set had been thin and far away, half buried in hiss. This set was full and round and immediate, the way a voice sounds when someone is standing in the same room as the microphone. Whatever was keying that handset was walking toward something, and there were only 2 handsets on that mountain above me. Ruth had one, my sister had the other. At 2340, Ingrid missed her check-in. I gave her 5 extra minutes, because panicking at minute 1 felt like something a little brother would do. Then I keyed the handset, told myself this was speaking and not clicking and therefore legal under the rules, and said, Ingrid, this is Station 4, position check. Hiss. The stove ticked. Somewhere under the floor, a mouse conducted its small business. Ingrid, Station 4. Position check. Over. And then her voice came back, and the relief hit me so fast that it took my brain a full 3 seconds to catch up to my ears and understand what was wrong with what I had heard. Because the radio said, in my sister's voice, perfectly warmly, with the exact dry lilt she used when she was teasing me, Ingrid, Station 4, position check, over. My own words. All of them. In her voice, I sat very still. Coincidence assembled itself in my head and fell apart just as fast. Rangers repeat transmissions, sure, readback is a real procedure, but you read back instructions, headings, the time. You do not read back a request for your own position in the other person's exact words, and you do not do it in a tone that teases. The radio hissed, patient. Then it said, Theo, open the door, I am out front. I forgot the knock. I want you to understand the engineering of that sentence, the cruelty of how well it was built, because that is exactly what a tired sister says. Nobody who was faking would admit to forgetting the secret knock. Admitting it was the credential. Every cell in my body stood up to go open that door, and what stopped me was not courage and not cleverness. What stopped me was the window. The window over the desk faced the front steps, and the front steps, lit faintly by the lamp spilling through the glass, were empty. I am looking at the steps, I said. My voice came out smaller than I had planned. There is nobody on the steps. A pause. Hiss. And the voice came back with no defensiveness at all. Only gentle, sisterly patience. And that was the moment fear stopped being a feeling in my chest and became the room I was standing in. I am at the back, it said. By the woodshed. Come around. The station did not have a back door. Ingrid knew that. Whatever was speaking knew the station had a woodshed, knew my name, knew her cadence down to the dry little uptick on the last word of a sentence, and did not know there was no back door. And that gap in its knowledge was the only proof of anything I had. I did not answer. Rule 2 had arrived in my head, late and out of context but suddenly comprehensible. If someone asks you a question and you did not hear it clearly, do not answer. The rules were never about questions. They were about conversation itself, about the fact that every word you give a thing like this is a brick it will build with. So I sat in the lamplight and gave it no more bricks. And the voice on the radio talked to me for 1 hour and 10 minutes. I am not going to repeat most of what it said. Some of it was small talk, eerily good small talk, about the larches, about the family group chat, about whether I had eaten. Some of it was less good, the seams showing, sentences that started in Ingrid's voice and arrived somewhere else, in a register no human throat keeps. Twice it keyed the mic and simply let me listen to footsteps moving through brush, slow, unhurried, circling, and once, near the end, it stopped pretending entirely and said, in a voice that was no longer my sister's, in a voice I can only describe as the sound a cold room would make if it could speak, the lake remembers you signed the board. At 0:51 the real knock came. 4. Then 2. I stood at the door with my hand on the bolt, and my heart performing crimes in my chest. And I said, what did you teach me about the light? Through 2 inches of cedar, exhausted, irritated, alive, my sister's voice said, trust it until it stops behaving. Now open the door, Theo. I have been listening to that thing wear my voice for an hour and I need to not be outside anymore. I opened it. Ingrid came in fast, bolted it behind her, and stood with her back against the wood, and for the first time in my life I watched my sister be afraid. She had heard everything on her own handset, the entire performance, unable to break in because, as she put it, you do not interrupt it. Interrupting it is answering it. Ruth had gone silent up at the junction an hour ago. Walsh had not been found, and on her way down the trail, on switchback 5, my sister had passed a man standing perfectly still among the trees, 10 meters off the path, facing uphill. He was wearing an orange vest, she said. And I kept walking, because Rule 7 is Rule 7. But Theo, the vest was new. The plastic still had that shine. Whatever stocks that wardrobe has not updated it since 1987. And it has not needed to because it has never once mattered what year the vest was from. Nobody who sees one stays long enough to check. We did not sleep. We sat with the lamp low, and the radio clicked 3 times at 2:10 and 3 times at 3:40. And neither of us moved, and at 5:55 the sky went gray, then salmon, then a clean hard gold, the light arriving on schedule, behaving, keeping the only promise the mountains had left. At 7 o'clock, Marisol called up from the trailhead. A second vehicle had been in the lot all night. She had finally run the plate. It belonged to Ruth, who lived in a camp at the junction all season. Ruth, who had no reason on this earth to have driven up yesterday morning, because Ruth was already supposed to be on the mountain. Ingrid looked at me over the radio, and I watched her assemble the same sentence I was assembling, and neither of us said it, so I will say it now, to you. Whoever had been calling Walsh's name from the top of Trail 9 in Ruth's voice the night before, while we triangulated our search around her position and trusted our pattern to her reports, had been on that frequency for hours. And we had answered every transmission. Search and rescue proper arrived by mid-morning. A helicopter sweep and a ground team of 6 out of the county. And I will compress what they found, because what they found was nothing. And nothing takes a long time to find. No Walsh, no Ruth. Ruth's camp at the junction stood intact, stove cold, sleeping bag zipped flat, and her pack sat in the center of the trail 20 meters above the junction sign with both straps still buckled. I watched my sister carry it down the last stretch to the trailhead. Pack number 5. I watched her log its weight. The county team worked the drainage for 2 days and pulled out at dusk on the 2nd, citing weather, though the weather was flawless. A high-pressure system, the sky scrubbed and ringing. I heard the team leader talking to Ingrid by the trucks, low, the way men talk when they want to be overheard by exactly one person. He said, "You know what district this is. We will list them as voluntary missing." And Ingrid said, "There is no such thing," and he said, "There is in this district," and he left her standing in the lot. That night she spread the map on the desk and put her finger on Bench Lake and did not say anything for a long time. "Walsh signed for Bench Lake," she said finally. "Day gear. Morning start. Whatever happened, happened on 9, and 9 is the only trail in this district with its own rule, and the rule is about counting, and nobody, not the old-timers, not the district office, nobody has ever told me what is on the 12th switchback. In 9 years I have counted 11. Every time, both directions, hundreds of trips. I have never counted 12. She looked up at me. "Tomorrow I am going to walk 9 in full daylight and count," she said. "And you are going to come with me, because after the other night I am not leaving you alone with that radio, and because 2 people counting cannot both be wrong." That is the sentence I think about most, out of everything. 2 people counting cannot both be wrong. It is the most reasonable sentence in the world. It belongs to the same family as water runs downhill and the sun sets once a day. The family of sentences the high country exists to disprove. We started up Trail 9 at 10 in the morning, under a sky so blue it looked enameled. And I have to tell you, the trail was beautiful. That is the obscene part. Old-growth hemlock and silver fir. The path stitched with roots. The air smelling of resin and cold stone. Light coming down through the canopy in physical columns you could have leaned a ladder against. Every 100 meters the absurdity of it grew. 2 adults walking single file through a postcard, counting out loud like children. 1, where the trail first bent back on itself above the creek. 2, at the rock slide. 3 through 6, climbing through timber. 7, where a burned snag stood silver against the green. At 8 we stopped and ate, and Ingrid pointed across the valley at the lookout we had visited on my 2nd day, in another lifetime. 9, 10, where the trees began to shrink and the light got wide. 11, the last one, the trail doubling back a final time and then running long and straight toward the junction and the lake. 11. We stood at the junction sign and Ingrid let out a breath that emptied her whole frame. 11, she said. Both of us. Daylight. Okay. The lake below the junction was the kind of blue that does not photograph honestly. We walked the shoreline calling for Walsh, for Ruth, out of duty more than hope, our voices skating flat across the water and dying without echo, which I noticed and decided not to mention. There was no wind. The larches on the far shore stood in gold rows, doubled perfectly in the surface, and the only sound was our boots on shale. It was Ingrid who stopped first. She was looking at the water near our feet, where the bottom shelved away into a colder color, and she had gone very still. "Theo," she said, What time is it? I looked at my watch. It was 1:54 in the afternoon. I told her so, and as I said it, I noticed I had raised my voice slightly, the way you do at twilight, when the dimness makes you feel like you also cannot be heard, and then I understood why my body had done that, and I looked up. The light was leaving, not clouds. The sky was naked. The sun, a white coin, still hung high over the western ridge, and the light was leaving anyway, draining out of the basin like water finding a crack, the enameled blue going long and gold and wrong, the larches across the lake igniting with sunset colors 3 hours before sunset. The temperature stepped off a ledge. Across the entire basin, every bird that had been talking stopped at once, on a single beat, like an orchestra cut off by a hand, and our shadows, which had been pooled neatly under us in the honest light of early afternoon, lay stretched long and thin across the shale, pointing uphill, toward the high country, toward the trail. Beside me, in a voice I had never heard my sister use, a voice with no floor under it, Ingrid said, "Walk. Do not run." I want to explain why the rule says walk, because I did not understand it until I was inside it. It is not about noise, and it is not about attracting anything. It is about counting. A second dusk takes your eyes first, and then it comes for your arithmetic. If you run, you stop counting. And on Trail 9, the counting is the only thing you have. We came off the shale and onto the trail in light the color of old brass. Ingrid took the front. 11 switchbacks down, she said over her shoulder. We count out loud, both of us, every one, whatever you see, whatever you hear. The count does not stop. If our numbers ever disagree, we stop moving and we hold hands like 5-year-olds and we count again from the last number we shared. Say yes. Yes, I said. 1, she said as the trail bent. 1, I said. The gloom came down in stages, like a theater dimming politely so no one trips. By switchback 2, the columns of light were gone. By 3, the trees had lost their tops, the canopy just a darker weight overhead. The cold was the strangest part. An indoor cold, refrigerated, with no breeze carrying it, as if the temperature were a property of the hour rather than the air. 2. 3. At 4, we heard the humming. It came from upslope, behind and above us, faint, tuneless, a person humming the way people hum when they are alone and content. Doing dishes, weeding a garden. It was such a domestic sound that my legs nearly stopped on their own. Ingrid's hand found my sleeve and pulled. And she said, 4, with her jaw set, and I said, 4, and we kept walking, and the humming kept pace with us, never nearer, never farther, all the way down the next 2 switchbacks. And the worst thing about it, the thing I cannot get out from under, is that on switchback 6 I caught myself starting to hum along. My chest had picked up the tune on its own, the way you catch a song from a passing car. Rule 5 had never been about being heard. It was about joining in. I bit my tongue until it bled. 6, said Ingrid. 6, I said, and the word came out wet. 7. The smell of wood smoke crossed the trail like a ribbon. Sweet and homely. Campfire smoke with, underneath it, a note of something else. Something that had no business in a campfire. A mineral smell, like wet rock and old coins. It passed left to right, at walking speed, and was gone. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing to say that was not a brick. 8. The radio on Ingrid's hip clicked 3 times. 9. And on 9, standing off the trail at the burned silver snag, exactly where no one had been on the way up, was the man in the orange vest. I am going to describe him as honestly as I can, which is to say incompletely, because the light by then was a deep blue gauze and my eyes were rationing. He stood 10 meters off the path, facing uphill, motionless, in dark work clothes and a vest with that new plastic shine, and the proportions of him were almost right. Almost. He stood the way a coat stands when it is hung on a peg, and for 1 second you mistake it for a person. Except this was the reverse of that, a person you kept trying to mistake for a coat, because every instinct you own prefers the coat. The count does not stop, Ingrid said. 9, I said. And we walked past him, 4 meters away at the closest. And he did not turn, and we did not run. And I will be proud of that last part for the rest of my life, however long that turns out to be. 10. The trail dropped through the shrinking trees and my body began to believe in survival. which is exactly when the mountain played its real card. From below us, downhill, around the bend of the 11th and final switchback, my sister's voice called out, "Theo, up here. You are almost there, buddy. I can see your headlamp." And beside me, from 1 meter to my left, my sister's voice said, "Do not answer that. I want you to sit with the geometry of that moment the way I have sat with it every night since." Ingrid to my left, real, warm, a hand on my sleeve. Ingrid below me, around the bend, calling up through the blue gauze with perfect warmth, using a nickname, Buddy, that our father used and she never had. The one below was flawed, you see. I knew it was flawed, and my mouth opened to answer it anyway, because it had asked nothing, it had only offered. You are almost there, and the body wants so badly to be almost there. 10? Said the Ingrid beside me. Iron in it. Say 10? 10, I said to her, only to her. We came around the final bend, the 11th, together, counting it out loud in unison like a prayer. 11. And the trail did not straighten. It bent again. I stood looking at it for a long, airless moment. A 12th switchback, where the long straight run to the trailhead should have been, the path doubling back and climbing upward through trees that should not have been there, into a blue that deepened with altitude, until it was simply night, and from somewhere up that impossible grade, faint and tuneless and content, the humming, if you count 12, turn around and count again on the way down. The rule had always sounded like madness. Now it read like mercy, the only instruction its writers had survived to give. Do not continue upward on a 12th switchback, as if anyone would, as if the pull of it were not, at that moment, the strongest thing on the mountain, because the 12th switchback was where the voice calling Buddy had gone, and the voice calling Buddy had Ruth's pack and Walsh's name and 9 seasons of my sister's cadence in its repertoire, and it was very, very good. Ingrid gripped my hand. 5-year-olds, she said. We turn around. We count down from 11. We do it now. Before it finishes dimming, we turned our backs on the 12th switchback, and the humming behind us stopped, the way a thing stops when it is listening, and we counted. 11. 10. 9. Past the snag where no one stood any longer. 8. 7. The wood smoke gone. 6. 5. 4. The gloom so total now that the count was the trail, the numbers the only footing left. 3. 2, 1, and the world turned the lights back on. I do not know how to describe it except like that. Between one step and the next, between the word one and the breath after it, the brass light poured back into the timber, the cold lifted, a varied thrush started up its single ringing note somewhere overhead as if it had never stopped, and my watch, when I finally remembered I owned one, said 2:31 in the afternoon. The entire descent, the humming, the smoke, the vest, the man, the voice, the 12th switchback, had fit inside 37 minutes of a flawless September day. We walked out of the trees into the trailhead lot, into honest sunlight, and Marisol came out of her booth and said, "That was fast. Did you forget something?" And neither of us answered her. And we drove to the station, and Ingrid signed the board. Ingrid, and then she stood with the pen in her hand for a moment and added a second line, in Theo, and underlined it twice, and I did not understand the underlining until much later. Here is the part of the story where I am supposed to give you an ending, and I am going to be honest with you instead. Walsh was never found. Ruth was never found. The file says voluntary missing, both of them, and the file is signed by people who pulled their teams out under a flawless sky. The district office accepted Ingrid's resignation in October without one question, which is its own kind of confession. She is a watershed specialist for a county utility now, on the wet side of the mountains. Her office has windows on 3 sides. She keeps the blinds up. She has never once, that I know of, set an alarm, because she wakes every morning before the sun and watches it arrive, checking its work. The laminated card sits on my desk in Ohio, because she would not have it in her house and could not make herself destroy it. I have read it 1,000 times, and the more I read it, the more I understand that it is not a list of rules, it is a list of survivors. Every line is the one sentence somebody made it back down with. There is no rule for the 12th switchback beyond do not continue, because the people who could have written that rule are the packs my sister carried down, weighed and logged, and now the part 1 have not told anybody. The reason I am finally saying all of this out loud to strangers on the internet at 1 in the morning. 3 weeks ago, my phone rang, and it was Ingrid, and we talked the way we talk now, which is more than 4 times a year, and near the end of the call there was a pause, a long one, and then her voice said, "Do you remember what I taught you about the light?" And I laughed and gave the answer, "Trust it until it stops behaving." And she laughed too, and we said goodnight. The next morning she called me again, and she was apologizing before I could speak. Her phone had died at noon the previous day, she said. Dead battery, charged it overnight. She was only just seeing my number in her recents and could not figure out how a call had connected. And what had we even talked about? And was everything okay? I told her everything was okay. I have gone over that evening call 100 times since. It was her cadence, her laugh. It asked about the large photos, and the family group chat, and whether I had eaten. It was warm and dry and flawless, and it asked me one question, only one. And the question was a test I had already taught it the answer to, on a trail, in the blue, 2 years ago. If someone asks you a question and you did not hear it clearly, do not answer. I heard it clearly. That is the problem. I hear it still. And some nights, lying in the flat, safe gloom of an apartment 2,000 miles from the nearest switchback, I find myself counting the sounds of my building the way we counted that trail, the radiator, 1, the elevator, 2, the traffic, 3, and I get to the end of the count of all the things I can name, and I lie very still, because lately, at the end of the count, there is a 12th sound, faint, tuneless, content, and the worst part, the part 1 will leave you with, is not the humming itself. It is how badly at 3 in the morning with the whole honest world asleep I want to hum along, stay on the marked trails, count everything. And when the light stops behaving, walk, do not run all the way home. The smell of microwave popcorn filled Jade's apartment as I settled onto her plush couch, wrapped in the throw blanket I'd claimed as my own over years of friendship. It was October 2022, and at 28, I found these quiet nights increasingly precious as adult responsibilities consumed more of our lives. Her apartment was cozy despite its disorganization. String lights illuminated stacks of books and half-finished craft projects, while photos of our college adventures covered nearly every wall space. "I've missed this," I said, watching her arrange snacks on the coffee table. "Work has been absolute torture lately." Jade nodded as she poured wine into mismatched glasses. "Tell me about it. The promotion sounds great until you're drowning in spreadsheets at midnight." We hadn't seen each other in nearly 2 months, our longest gap since becoming friends in freshman year. The plan was simple: comfort food, nostalgic movies, and absolutely no discussion of our professional lives. Her apartment perfectly reflected her personality, chaotic but inviting. Empty coffee mugs collected on bookshelves beside carefully tended plants, and her collection of vintage movie posters gave the space a unique charm. "I cleaned for 3 hours before you got here," she confessed, noticing my glance at the scattered magazines. "This is actually the presentable version." I laughed. "You should see my place. I'm pretty sure something's evolving in my refrigerator at this point." As Jade scrolled through streaming options, I sank deeper into the couch. The familiar comfort of our friendship temporarily masked the exhaustion that had been my constant companion for weeks. Outside, rain began to tap against the windows, creating the perfect backdrop for our evening. "So dinner," Jade announced, putting down the remote. "I was thinking pizza. That place on Westmore that we used to love just started delivering to this neighborhood." "Perfect," I agreed, already imagining the garlic knots that had sustained us through countless study sessions. "My treat this time." Jade hesitated slightly, her fingers hovering over her phone. "Actually, I've got this guy who might be bringing it over." She caught my expression and quickly added, "Not like that. He's just, well, you'll see. His name is Gordon. He helps me out sometimes." I raised an eyebrow. "Helps you out? That sounds suspiciously like you've acquired a personal assistant." "It's not like that," she insisted, though her tone suggested otherwise. "He's just really helpful." Little did I understand the true meaning behind her words, or how significantly this helpful stranger would alter the course of our lives. When the doorbell rang 40 minutes later, Jade jumped up with unexpected nervousness. "That'll be Gordon with the food," she said, smoothing her sweatpants as if suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. Just the delivery guy, I mumbled, slightly annoyed at the interruption to our evening. I had assumed we'd be alone. The man who entered carried more than just pizza boxes. An immediate atmosphere of awkwardness followed him into the room, tall, thin, with darting eyes that never quite settled on anything. He appeared to be in his early 30s, dressed in a neatly pressed button-down shirt that seemed oddly formal for delivering food. "Hi, Gordon," Jade greeted him with excessive warmth. "Thanks so much for doing this." "No problem at all," he replied, his voice softer than his frame would suggest. He placed the boxes on the counter with careful precision. "I got extra napkins like you asked, and those breadsticks from the place across town that you mentioned last week." I noticed he'd brought items from 2 different restaurants, a detail that struck me as strange for ordinary delivery. "Gordon, this is my friend," Jade introduced us. "We've known each other since college." His eyes finally connected with mine, and I felt a strange sensation, like being examined rather than seen. "Nice to meet you," he said, extending a hand that was unexpectedly cold. "Likewise," I responded automatically, discomfort building as he held the handshake several seconds too long. "Gordon has been amazingly helpful since I moved to this neighborhood," Jade explained, her tone suggesting she wanted me to approve of him. "He knows everyone and everything around here." Gordon's posture changed subtly at the praise, standing straighter as a hint of smile formed. "Just trying to be neighborly." The conversation stalled into uncomfortable silence before Gordon suddenly asked, "Do you live nearby too?" Before I could formulate a vague answer, Jade supplied, "She's over on Riverview, in those new apartments." I shot her a look of betrayal as Gordon nodded, mentally filing away this information. "That's a nice area, great running trails behind those buildings." The implication that he knew my neighborhood in detail made me uneasy. "Maybe we could exchange numbers," he suggested, phone already in hand, "in case you ever need anything delivered. Or help with, well, anything at all." With Jade watching expectantly, I reluctantly recited my number, which Gordon saved with meticulous attention. "Well, I should let you enjoy your evening," he finally said, though he made no immediate move toward the door. "Thanks again, Gordon. Drive safe," Jade prompted, finally giving him the cue to leave. When the door closed behind him, I turned to Jade with widened eyes. "What was that about?" She busied herself with the pizza boxes. "He's just really helpful. Picks up groceries, does errands. It started when I needed help moving a bookshelf, and now he's your unpaid servant who knows where I live," I finished. "He's harmless," she insisted. "Just lonely, I think. No social skills, but desperately wants friends." As we settled back with our food, I couldn't shake the sensation of Gordon's cold handshake, or the way his eyes had cataloged every detail of my appearance. Despite Jade's assurances, something about Gordon felt deeply wrong, a feeling I would later wish I had trusted more fully. Within hours of meeting Gordon, my phone buzzed with a new group message. "Created new chat, weekend friends," read the notification, followed by Gordon's first message. A meme about pizza that wasn't particularly funny. "He added you to our chat," Jade texted privately. "Sorry, he does this." Over the next weeks, Gordon maintained a careful digital presence, sending just enough messages to remain connected without crossing into obvious harassment. His strategy seemed calculated. A funny video on Tuesday, a local news story on Thursday, an offer of assistance every Saturday morning, like clockwork. "Need any help this weekend?" became his refrain, accompanied by lists of errands he could run or tasks he could complete. I consistently declined with brief politeness. "All good this weekend, but thanks." His responses were always immediate and excessive. "No problem at all. Just let me know if anything changes. Happy to help anytime. Enjoy your weekend." The exclamation points felt like tiny shouts of desperation. Through Jade, I learned more about Gordon's involvement in her life. He had somehow integrated himself into her routine, delivering groceries she never requested, appearing with coffee when she casually mentioned being tired, offering rides when her car was in the shop. "Doesn't it concern you?" I asked during one of our phone calls. "How much he knows about your schedule?" "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it's also really convenient, and he never asks for anything in return." "That's what worries me," I replied. "People usually want something." When Gordon began referencing details I'd mentioned in conversations with Jade, my dislike of mushrooms, my work schedule, a planned trip to visit my parents, I realized he was extracting information indirectly. His knowledge accumulated in small, seemingly innocuous pieces. My favorite coffee shop, my running route, my car's make and model. My apartment building's layout, each detail insignificant alone but disturbing in aggregate. I began carefully filtering information shared with Jade, knowing it might reach Gordon. This caution proved justified when he sent a get-well-soon message after I'd called in sick to work, information I'd only shared with my boss and Jade. The persistent offers of help continued until, in a moment of poor judgment I would come to deeply regret, I finally accepted. The washing machine in my apartment building had been broken for 2 weeks when I spotted a reasonably priced replacement on an online marketplace. The problem? I had no way to transport it, and professional installation was beyond my budget. During a moment of frustration, I mentioned this in the group chat. Gordon's response was instantaneous. "I can help. I have a truck and know how to install washing machines. When would work for you?" After a day of deliberation and Jade's assurance that Gordon had helped her with similar tasks, I reluctantly agreed. "That would be really helpful, actually. Are you sure it's not too much trouble?" "No trouble at all. Happy to help," came his eager reply. That Saturday, Gordon arrived in a meticulously clean pickup truck, wearing work gloves and carrying a toolbox that appeared to contain every possible tool required. The efficiency with which he loaded the washing machine, transported it, and installed it in my apartment was admittedly impressive. What unsettled me was his attention to my living space. The way his eyes lingered on family photos, how he noted my book collection, the casual opening of cabinets under the premise of looking for connections. "You have a nice place," he commented, his gaze sweeping across my apartment in what felt like memorization. "Very secure building, too. Good locks." When the installation was complete, I attempted to pay him for his time and effort. "Please, let me give you something for all this work." Gordon shook his head firmly. "I don't want your money." "Then at least let me buy you lunch or something," I insisted, uncomfortable with the imbalance of obligation. His expression shifted subtly. "Actually, there is something." He maintained casual eye contact that felt anything but casual. "There's this trail I know, not far from here. Great views. Maybe we could hike it sometime? This weekend, perhaps?" The request hung in the air, seemingly innocent yet loaded with implication. My instinct screamed to decline, but the weight of social obligation, he had just spent 3 hours helping me, made outright rejection difficult. "I suppose that would work," I heard myself agreeing. "Just a short hike, though. I have plans later in the day." Gordon's face transformed with genuine pleasure. "Great. I'll pick you up Sunday at 9. After he left, I immediately called Jade. "I just agreed to go hiking with Gordon." "Oh," she paused. "That's new. He's never asked me to do anything social." "Should I be worried?" I asked directly. "No," she answered, though her hesitation was noticeable. "He's odd but harmless. Just maybe keep your location shared with me." That night, I researched the trail Gordon had mentioned. Oak Ridge Trail, a popular local hiking spot with well-traveled paths and regular ranger patrols. This knowledge provided some comfort, but anxiety still crept through my dreams, manifesting as visions of forests and watching eyes. Sunday morning arrived with perfect autumn clarity, crisp air, golden sunlight, and a sky so intensely blue it seemed artificially enhanced. Under different circumstances, it would have been an ideal day for hiking. Gordon arrived precisely at 9, his truck freshly washed, wearing hiking boots that appeared brand new. He had brought water bottles, trail mix, and a first aid kit, all presented with a shopkeeper's pride. "Safety first," he said, indicating the kit. "Never know what might happen on a trail." The drive to Oak Ridge was filled with Gordon's monologue about local history, plant identification, and hiking safety, information delivered with the rehearsed quality of a tour guide. I contributed occasional acknowledgments while sharing my location with both Jade and my sister. The trailhead parking lot contained several other vehicles, a reassuring sign of other hikers. Gordon seemed slightly disappointed by this. "It's busier than usual," he remarked. "We might want to take one of the less traveled paths to get the full experience." "I prefer staying on the main trail," I countered firmly, "especially since I'm not familiar with this area." He acquiesced with a tight smile, and we began our hike on the well-marked main path. For the first mile, everything progressed normally. Gordon maintained a respectful distance, pointed out interesting plants, and shared genuinely engaging facts about local wildlife. The tension in my shoulders began to ease slightly as we passed other hiking groups. Then we reached a fork in the trail. "The main path continues that way," Gordon indicated the wider, clearly maintained route. "But there's something really special down this side trail. Something not many people get to see." The smaller path veered sharply downhill, disappearing into denser forest. No other hikers were visible in that direction. "What's down there?" I asked, remaining firmly in place. "It's hard to explain," Gordon replied, his voice taking on an unusual intensity. "It's something I discovered a few weeks ago. Something remarkable. I've been waiting for the right person to share it with." Alarm bells screamed in my mind as Gordon stepped closer, his expression shifting into something I hadn't seen before, an almost childlike excitement tinged with something darker. "It's not far," he continued, already moving toward the side path. "Just 5 minutes. You'll never forget it, I promise." Making a split-second decision I would later recognize as profoundly unwise, I followed, partially from curiosity, partially from the social pressure of not wanting to seem unreasonable, and partially from the false security of knowing others were nearby on the main trail. The side path descended steeply, forcing us to navigate exposed roots and slippery leaves. The sunlight diminished as the tree canopy thickened overhead, temperature dropping noticeably. Gordon moved with unexpected agility, frequently looking back to ensure I was following. After several minutes, longer than the promised 5, Gordon stopped abruptly. "We're almost there," he whispered, though there was no apparent reason for lowered voices. "Just through these trees." He pushed aside a branch, revealing a small clearing surrounded by dense undergrowth. My heart rate accelerated as I stepped forward, unsure what I expected to find. What awaited would permanently alter the trajectory of my life. The clearing was unremarkable at first glance, a depression in the forest floor scattered with fallen leaves and broken branches. Then the smell registered, a heavy, sickly sweet odor that caught in my throat and triggered an instinctive recoil. Gordon stood motionless, watching me intently. "Do you see it?" I didn't want to look where he was indicating, but my eyes followed his gesture to a disturbed area of ground partially concealed by gathered branches and leaves. Through the deliberate camouflage, I could distinguish the unmistakable shape of a human form. The body lay face up, partially buried but clearly visible. A man in his 40s, dressed in hiking clothes now discolored and degraded. Natural decomposition had begun its inexorable process, the face distorted but still recognizably human. Various insects moved purposefully across the exposed skin. My body responded before my mind could process, stepping backward, breathing quickening, fingernails digging into my palms. "Isn't it fascinating?" Gordon's voice had transformed, carrying a reverent quality that chilled me more than the sight itself. "I found him 3 weeks ago. No one else knows he's here." Horror compounded as the implications clarified. Gordon had discovered a dead body in the woods and chosen to keep it secret, to preserve it as a macabre exhibit to share with select viewers. "We need to call the police," I managed, voice barely cooperating. Gordon continued as if I hadn't spoken. "At first the smell was overwhelming, but it's better now. I've been documenting the changes. Nature's recycling process is remarkably efficient." The casualness of his tone, discussing human decomposition as one might describe a science experiment, triggered a surge of adrenaline. My survival instincts finally overcame social conditioning. "I think I'm going to be sick," I gasped, turning away. "I need to get back to the main trail." Gordon stepped closer, his expression showing not concern, but disappointment. "We just got here. Don't you want to look closer? The way the insects have specialized is truly remarkable." "No," I said firmly, already moving backward. "I need air. We need to report this immediately." As I retreated up the path, Gordon followed reluctantly. "Most people don't understand," he called after me. "They're disconnected from the reality of death. This is natural, beautiful even." I increased my pace, desperate to reach other hikers. The isolation of the side trail now felt suffocating, the distance back to safety impossibly long. Gordon kept pace easily, continuing his disturbing commentary. When we finally emerged onto the main trail, I spotted an older couple approaching. With forced casualness that took tremendous effort, I called out to them. "Excuse me, could you point us toward the trailhead? I think we took a wrong turn." The man consulted a trail map. "You're heading the right way, but it's about 2 miles back." "Would you mind if we walked with you?" I asked, ignoring Gordon's frown. "I'm feeling a bit lightheaded." The couple agreed readily, and I positioned myself between them and Gordon, ensuring I wouldn't be left alone with him again. The mile-long walk back felt interminable, my mind racing between processing what I'd seen and planning my next actions. As we approached the parking area, I pulled out my phone and pretended to receive a call. "Hi, Jade," I said to the silent phone. Yes, I'm still with Gordon. We're just finishing our hike. I'll have him drop me at your place in about 20 minutes, okay? Gordon watched this performance with narrowed eyes but said nothing. Inside Gordon's truck, silence hung heavily as we pulled away from the trailhead. My heart hammered against my ribs as I gripped my phone tightly, ready to call emergency services at the first sign of danger. You didn't enjoy our discovery, Gordon finally said, his tone suggesting genuine bewilderment. Gordon, that was a dead person, I stated firmly. Someone who should be reported to authorities and returned to their family. He shrugged slightly. Death is part of life. Most people hide from it, but I find that dishonest. Did you... I hesitated, uncertain how to phrase my suspicion. How did you first find the body? Hiking, he answered simply. Same trail, about 3 weeks ago. I was exploring off-path and there he was. I studied his profile, searching for tells of deception. And you didn't report it because... Reports mean paperwork, questions, interruptions to the natural process. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. People fear what they don't understand. While his explanation left critical questions unanswered, his attention remained fortunately focused on driving. I texted Jade under the guise of checking my notifications. Emergency. Gordon showed me a dead body in the woods, not joking. Coming to your place. Call police after we arrive. Her response was immediate. What? Are you safe? Should I call now? Wait until I'm there. Don't want him to run. Act normal when we arrive. The 20-minute drive stretched into eternity. I maintained superficial conversation while mentally cataloging every detail I could remember about the body and location to report to police. When we finally reached Jade's apartment, she was waiting outside, her casual pose betrayed by the tension visible in her shoulders. Thanks for the ride, I told Gordon, exiting quickly. And the hike. We should do it again, he suggested, seeming genuinely oblivious to the horror of the situation. There's more to see on other trails. Sure, I lied. Text me. Jade and I watched him drive away before rushing inside. The moment her door closed, I collapsed against it, trembling uncontrollably. Tell me everything, she demanded. Between gasping breaths, I recounted the discovery. Jade called the police immediately, her voice steady despite her pallor. Within 30 minutes, 2 detectives sat in Jade's living room as I detailed my experience. They listened with professional detachment, occasionally interjecting with clarifying questions. And you're certain the individual was deceased? One asked. Not injured? Absolutely certain, I confirmed. Decomposition was advanced. They asked about Gordon, his full name, address, how we knew him, his behavior before and after showing me the body. I described his disturbing fascination and lack of appropriate emotional response. We'll need you to guide officers to the location, the detective explained. Can you do that tomorrow morning? I nodded, despite the revulsion at the thought of returning. After they left, Jade and I sat in stunned silence before she finally spoke. I never thought... He was strange. But this... We need to cut him out completely, I insisted. Block his number, his social media, everything. What if he retaliates? She whispered. He knows where we both live. The realization that Gordon now presented an active threat rather than merely an unsettling presence settled over us like a shroud. We need a plan, I said. A careful exit strategy. The following weeks unfolded in a blur of police statements, nightmares, and constant vigilance. I led officers to the body, which was recovered and later identified as a 45-year-old hiker who had been reported missing a month earlier. Cause of death was determined to be a cardiac event, a natural death that Gordon had transformed into something macabre through his actions. Gordon himself remained disturbingly present in our periphery. His messages continued as if nothing had happened, though we responded with increasing brevity. Police questioned him extensively about his failure to report finding the body, but without evidence of foul play in the hiker's death, they could only charge him with relatively minor offenses related to interfering with a death scene. Our exit strategy from Gordon's life proceeded with excruciating slowness. We feared that an abrupt disconnection might trigger escalation, so instead we implemented a deliberate fade, delayed responses, claims of busyness, gradual unavailability. Gordon seemed to sense the withdrawal. His messages increased in frequency even as our responses decreased. He appeared unexpectedly outside Jade's workplace one afternoon just to say hello, and left packages of unrequested groceries at our doors. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when Jade began dating someone. When she mentioned her new relationship in our group chat, Gordon's messages suddenly ceased entirely. The silence was both relieving and unnerving. 3 months after the hiking incident, police arrested a man in connection with another death, a homicide that had occurred in the same forest region. Through social media investigation, they discovered this man had connections to Gordon. They followed each other on several platforms and had exchanged messages. While Gordon was never charged with direct involvement in any homicide, the investigation revealed disturbing patterns in his behavior. Documented fascination with death scenes, extensive photography of roadkill and dead animals, and journal entries detailing his observations of decomposition processes. Psychological evaluation concluded he suffered from a complex combination of conditions that manifested in his inappropriate responses to death and human remains, along with his patterns of intrusive behavior and social misconduct. Today, 5 years later, I still avoid hiking trails. The rustle of leaves in wooded areas triggers immediate anxiety. Jade has moved to another state, partly motivated by putting distance between herself and the memories of Gordon. The last we heard, Gordon had been institutionalized after an incident involving cemetery desecration. While his direct connection to any murder remains unproven, his relationship with death continues to exist outside normal human boundaries. What stays with me most isn't the disturbing image of the body in the woods, though that appears often enough in dreams. Rather, it's the memory of Gordon's expression as he showed me his discovery, the genuine incomprehension that I didn't share his fascination, the complete disconnect from normal human emotion. In the years since, I've come to understand that the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural creatures lurking in shadows. They're the people walking among us whose internal landscape is so fundamentally different from our own that connection becomes impossible. People who look human but operate by unfathomable rules. I keep my doors doubly locked now. I verify the identity of delivery people through peepholes. I no longer give out my phone number casually, and I've become selective about which social media platforms I use. Most importantly, I've learned to trust that flutter of unease when something feels wrong about a person or situation. That sensation exists for a reason, an evolutionary warning system honed over millennia of human experience. When someone shows you who they are, especially in small, unsettling ways, believe them the first time. Your survival may depend on it. My name is John Erskine, and this happened to me back in 2012 in the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. I'd been living in a small cabin a few miles off the old service road, trying to make a quiet life without power lines or neighbors. I liked it that way. I had a small hand-built shelter with a wood stove and a cot, a rain barrel, and enough canned goods to get by for months if I had to. The forest stretched in all directions, thick with oak and beech trees, their leaves filtering the sunlight so it always felt like late afternoon under the canopy. Back then, the sound of nothing, that gentle hush of wind and distant bird calls, soothed my nerves. I felt at home. People often ask why I chose to live that way. The truth is complicated. 3 years before, I'd walked away from a career in architectural engineering after a building collapse killed 2 workers. The investigation cleared me of wrongdoing, but I couldn't shake the guilt. The sound of their names being read at the memorial service still echoed in my head on quiet nights. So I retreated, inch by inch, from civilization. First to a small apartment in Pittsburgh, then to a rental cottage in rural Butler County, and finally to this cabin I purchased for cash from an old hunter who could no longer make the trek into the woods. The transaction was simple: $10,000, a handshake, and a crude hand-drawn map marking the property lines. The cabin itself was primitive but sturdy. 18 by 24 feet, with rough-hewn logs chinked with a mixture of clay and moss. The roof was simple cedar shakes I'd repaired myself during that first spring. Inside, I had the basics: the wood stove that served for both heating and cooking, a small table with 2 chairs, though I never had visitors, shelves lined with canned goods and supplies, and my cot with wool blankets that smelled of cedar and smoke. I rarely saw anyone else. On a good week, I might spot a single vehicle rumbling far off on a dirt road, or glimpse a pair of hikers passing by a few ridges over. That year had been especially quiet. The only real human contact came when I hiked out twice a month for supplies at a gas station off Route 66, where the clerk sometimes called me Mountain Man, and asked if I was crazy to live that way. The clerk, an older man named Roy with tobacco-stained fingers and cracked leather skin, once told me, "Wood's got eyes, you know, always watching. Man ain't meant to be alone out there." I laughed it off, but sometimes in the dead of night, when the wind died down completely and the forest fell unnaturally silent, I wondered if he was right. My days followed a simple rhythm. I woke with the sun, cooked a small breakfast of oatmeal or whatever I had on hand, and spent the morning on maintenance tasks. Afternoons were for gathering firewood, hunting, checking my crude traps for rabbits, or tending to the small garden I'd started behind the cabin where the sun broke through the canopy for a few precious hours. Evenings were for reading dog-eared paperbacks by oil lamplight, writing in my journal, or just sitting outside watching the stars emerge between the treetops. One evening, early October, I remember the sun dipping low and the air cooling fast. The leaves were starting to turn, painting the forest in fierce oranges and deep reds. I'd been cutting deadwood for the stove and stacking it behind the cabin. I kept my tools neat, an old axe with a hickory handle smoothed by years of use, a worn handsaw that needed sharpening, and a hatchet for kindling. After a few hours, my arms ached nicely, and I felt good about my work. I sat out front on a stump I'd fashioned into a seat, chewing on some jerky, watching a few crows hop around the clearing. The forest had felt different that day. Quieter than usual. No distant woodpeckers, fewer squirrels chattering in the branches. Even the wind seemed reluctant to stir the leaves. I didn't think much of it then. Weather changes, animals migrating, nothing unusual for autumn. As the light faded, I noticed movement near the creek that trickled about 100 yards downhill from my cabin. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. At first, I assumed it was a deer carcass. Hunters sometimes failed to track their kill properly, and it wouldn't be the first time I'd found the remains of someone else's hunt. But I didn't see antlers, didn't see the shape move. Something felt wrong. The air seemed to thicken around me as I stared at that dark shape near the creek bed. I set down my jerky and stood, stretching my stiff back. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something that needed investigating before dark. Either way, I needed to know. I grabbed my leather gloves and a walking stick I'd carved from ashwood, more out of habit than any sense of danger. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the western ridge, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the leaf-strewn ground. Should check it out, I muttered to myself, breaking the silence that had settled around me. My voice sounded strange in my ears, too loud and yet somehow muffled by the dense forest air. I started down the gentle slope toward the creek, not knowing that in the next few hours, everything about my quiet life would change forever. The forest floor crunched beneath my boots as I made my way downhill. Fallen leaves in amber and russet formed a crackling carpet that made stealth impossible. I followed a faint game trail worn by deer coming to drink at the creek, winding between old-growth trees with trunks wider than my outstretched arms. As I got closer, I could make out more details of the strange object. It wasn't a deer, after all. It was something bright, unnaturally bright for the forest, a splash of vivid color against the earthy palette of autumn. A backpack, bright red with black straps, lying in the brush at an odd angle, as if it had been thrown or dropped in haste. I paused, scanning the area. Hikers weren't uncommon in the national forest, but they rarely ventured this far from the marked trails, and they certainly didn't abandon expensive gear without good reason. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the dense trees. No response came except for the startled flutter of wings as a bird took flight somewhere above me. I approached cautiously, looking for signs of whoever had left the pack behind. The ground around it showed scuff marks and broken twigs, signs of a struggle, or someone moving erratically. I crouched beside the backpack, noting how the main compartment had been torn open, its contents scattered. A few protein bars with the wrappers still intact, a high-end flashlight that still worked when I pressed the button, a single hiking boot with the laces undone, and a trail map from some local outfitter. I picked up the map, unfolding it with care. A route had been marked in red pen, starting from the Millstone Creek trailhead about 5 miles east and venturing deep into the forest, right through the area where my cabin stood. Someone had written, "Day 2 inches" near my section of the woods. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, cold and heavy. Something was wrong here. People don't just abandon their gear in the wilderness without reason. I folded the map and stood, intending to gather the scattered items. That's when I noticed the drag marks in the soft earth near the creek bank. a long, irregular furrow leading away from the backpack and deeper into the undergrowth. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn around, walk back to my cabin, and pretend I'd seen nothing. The forest had always been my sanctuary, not a place of dread. But curiosity pushed me forward, one reluctant step after another, following those drag marks through a thicket of mountain laurel. The brush opened to a small clearing, and that's where I found him. A man lying face down, his jacket pushed up around his shoulders, exposing a thin strip of pale skin above his jeans. The back of his head was matted with something dark and sticky that caught the fading light with a sickening gleam. His left arm bent under him at an impossible angle, and he didn't move at all. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The man looked to be around 30, with short brown hair and an Apache-style beard. He wore expensive hiking gear, the kind serious outdoorsmen invest in, not casual weekend warriors. "Hey," I called weakly, though I already knew he wouldn't answer. The stillness around him had the unmistakable quality of death. No rise and fall of breathing, no subtle shifts of a body at rest. I approached slowly, as if he might suddenly sit up. The smell hit me when I got closer. Metallic and organic, the unmistakable scent of fresh blood mixed with something else, something worse. I knelt beside him, touching his neck with 2 fingers, searching for a pulse I knew I wouldn't find. His skin felt cool but not cold, meaning he hadn't been dead long. Hours, not days. The back of his skull had been crushed by something heavy, caved in like an eggshell. Dried blood formed a dark halo in the dirt beneath his head. This wasn't an accident. No fall could cause damage this severe. This was murder. I rocked back on my heels, my mind racing. I needed to report this. The nearest ranger station was 15 miles away, the closest phone even further. By the time I got help and returned, it would be well past midnight. A twig snapped somewhere uphill. The sound cut through my thoughts like a knife. I turned sharply, scanning the forest behind me. The day had faded to dusk, shadows deepening between the trees. Then I saw them. 2 figures picking their way through the brush about 40 yards away. One wore a stained yellow jacket, loose and torn at the elbows, with pale, bony arms protruding. He moved with an unsettling grace, like a predator accustomed to stalking prey. At his side hung a long hunting knife with a black handle, the blade catching what little light remained. His face looked narrow and sharp, with a crooked nose and a beard trimmed into a rough goatee. The other man was heavier set, with broad shoulders straining against a sweat-soaked gray t-shirt despite the cool evening air. He cradled something in his right hand, a metal pipe or tool that gleamed dully. His face was partially obscured by a dark baseball cap pulled low, but I could see a thick jaw covered in stubble. They weren't hikers, they weren't forest rangers. They were moving with purpose, scanning the ground, following a trail, my trail. And based on the dead man at my feet, I had a terrible suspicion about who they were and what they'd done. Our eyes met across the distance. For a moment, nobody moved. The thin man narrowed his eyes and slowly shook his head, a subtle warning that sent ice through my veins. Run. That single word pulsed through my mind, overriding all other thoughts. I turned and fled uphill, abandoning any pretense of careful movement. Branches whipped my face as I crashed through the undergrowth, my boots slipping on damp leaves. Behind me, I heard them give chase, their movements just as frantic and much less cautious. "Get him!" a rough voice shouted, followed by the sound of snapping branches and heavy footfalls. I knew these woods better than they did. That was my only advantage. I veered off the path I'd taken down, cutting across a steeper section where fallen trees created natural barriers. My lungs burned as I pushed uphill, propelled by raw fear. My cabin was about 200 yards away, just over the next rise. I could make it if I kept moving, if I didn't fall. The growing darkness worked both for and against me. Harder for them to spot me, but easier for me to miss my footing. A rock turned under my boot and I stumbled, barely catching myself on a tree trunk. The rough bark scraped my palms as I pushed off again, hearing my pursuers gaining ground. The heavier man was cursing steadily, his breathing labored but determined. I crested the small ridge and saw my cabin ahead, a dark silhouette against the deepening blue of the evening sky. Never had that simple structure looked so much like salvation. I sprinted across the clearing, making for the tool shed where I'd left my axe after splitting wood. The shed door squeaked as I yanked it open, fumbling in the darkness for the familiar wooden handle. My fingers closed around it just as the 2 men emerged from the trees at the edge of my property. I backed away from the shed, axe gripped tightly in both hands, and moved behind the cabin where shadows would hide me. My heart hammered so hard I was certain they could hear it. I pressed my back against the rough logs and tried to control my breathing, listening for their approach. For a long minute, silence stretched across the clearing. Had they lost track of me? Had they given up? I dared to hope, but then I heard the crunch of boots on dry leaves coming steadily closer. "I know you're here," the thin man called, his voice deceptively calm. "We just want to talk." The absurdity of his words might have made me laugh if I wasn't terrified. They hadn't chased me through the forest to talk. They'd killed one man already. I was a witness. The math wasn't complicated. I gripped the axe tighter, my palms slick with sweat. I had to move. Staying put would only corner me. I edged along the cabin wall, trying to keep my footsteps silent, working my way toward the front where I might have a chance to make a break for deeper woods. A twig snapped under my boot, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. "There!" the heavier man shouted, and heavy footsteps pounded toward my position. I abandoned stealth and ran, but I'd waited too long. The thin man appeared around the corner of the cabin, his knife already raised. Our eyes met, and I saw nothing human there, just cold calculation and the promise of violence. He lunged. I swung the axe in a wild arc. The night had just begun. The axe whistled through the air, missing the thin man by inches as he danced backward with surprising agility. His eyes widened slightly. Perhaps he hadn't expected me to fight back, before narrowing with renewed determination. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice unnervingly gentle, like someone speaking to a frightened animal. I didn't respond. Words seemed pointless now. I adjusted my grip on the axe and kept my eyes on his knife, a serious hunting blade, at least 8 inches long with a serrated section near the handle. The kind designed for gutting and skinning. We circled each other in the growing darkness, the space between the cabin and the tree line becoming our arena. I was acutely aware of every sound, his soft footfalls, my own ragged breathing, and the absence of the heavier man's movements. Where was he? The answer came with brutal clarity as a shadow detached itself from the side of the cabin. The heavier man had circled around while his partner kept me distracted. He swung the metal pipe in a vicious arc toward my head. I jerked backward, but not fast enough. The pipe glanced off my left shoulder, sending a bolt of white-hot pain down my arm. I staggered, nearly dropping the axe, my vision blurring momentarily. The thin man seized the opportunity, darting forward with his knife. I twisted away, feeling the blade slice through my jacket sleeve and into the flesh of my forearm. Warm blood immediately soaked the fabric, but adrenaline dulled the pain to a distant throb. I swung the axe one-handed, forcing them both to retreat briefly. My injured arm hung awkwardly at my side, blood dripping from my fingertips onto the fallen leaves below. "You've got spirit," the thin man said, almost admiringly. "Most would have collapsed by now." "What do you want?" I finally asked, my voice hoarse. "I don't have anything worth taking." The heavier man chuckled, a sound like stones grinding together. "It ain't about taking. It's about leaving no trace." They began to separate, moving to flank me on either side. I backed up until I felt the cabin wall behind me, eliminating one avenue of attack but trapping myself in the process. My options were dwindling rapidly. The cabin door was about 15 feet to my right. If I could reach it, get inside, perhaps I could barricade myself and find another weapon. The shotgun stored in the loft suddenly seemed like my only hope. I feinted left, then pivoted right and sprinted for the door. The thin man anticipated my move and lunged to intercept me, but I brought the axe down in a desperate swing that forced him to dive aside. The heavier man was slower to react, giving me the seconds I needed to reach the door. I practically threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me and fumbling with the simple wooden latch. It wouldn't hold them for long. The door was sturdy enough for keeping out curious animals, not determined killers, but it might buy me precious time. Inside, the cabin was dark and still. I moved by memory and touch, making my way to the small table and dragging it across the plank floor to wedge against the door. My wounded arm protested every movement, hot streams of blood making my grip slippery. "We know you saw us," the thin man called from outside, his voice muffled by the logs between us. "We know you saw him too. Can't let you go telling tales." I ignored his words, focused entirely on survival. I grabbed a clean dish towel from beside my wash basin and hastily wrapped it around my forearm, cinching it tight with my teeth and good hand. The white fabric immediately bloomed red, but the pressure slowed the bleeding. Next, I needed a better weapon. The kitchen knife was pathetically inadequate, barely 6 inches long with a cheap, dull blade I used for opening cans and cutting vegetables. But it was better than nothing. I snatched it from its place on the shelf, then looked around the dark cabin for anything else that might serve. The shotgun. My grandfather's old Remington pump action, stored in the loft for years, practically forgotten. Did I even have shells for it? I couldn't remember the last time I'd fired it or checked its condition. Outside, I heard the men conferring in low voices. Then footsteps circling the cabin, testing windows, looking for weaknesses. I used the moment to climb the rickety ladder to the loft, moving as quietly as possible on the creaking wood. The loft was cramped and dusty, hardly more than a storage space under the peaked roof. I felt around in the darkness, hands skimming over cardboard boxes and cloth bundles. Finally, my fingers touched cold metal, the shotgun wrapped in an old oilcloth. I pulled it free, heart pounding with desperate hope. The weapon felt heavier than I remembered, the blued steel catching what little moonlight filtered through the small loft window. I broke it open, peering down the barrel. Clean enough, no obvious obstructions. But without shells, it was just an awkward club. Where would I have put ammunition? Think, John, think. A small tin box came to mind, the one where I kept odd valuables and emergency supplies. I scrabbled through the loft items until I found it, prying open the rusty lid with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled among old photos and important papers, lay a small cardboard box of shotgun shells, half full. I nearly wept at the sight. With fumbling haste, I loaded 2 shells into the gun, the satisfying click of each round sliding home the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. A loud thud from below jolted me to attention. They were testing the door, pushing against my makeshift barricade. The table legs scraped against the floor as the door opened an inch before catching on the obstruction. "He's barricaded it," the heavier man growled. "Want me to break a window?" "No," the thin man replied. "Too much noise. We'll get through the door." I eased back down the ladder, shotgun cradled in my good arm, and positioned myself across from the entrance. The limited space of the cabin left few tactical options. I had one advantage. In the darkness, I knew every inch of this place by heart. The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. The table legs skidded another inch across the floor. Another impact, and the wooden latch splintered audibly. "We're coming in," the thin man announced, as if he were a dinner guest politely giving warning. "Put down whatever you've got, and we'll make it quick." The calm in his voice chilled me more than any shouting could have. These weren't hot-headed attackers acting on impulse. They were methodical, practiced. The dead hiker hadn't been their first victim, and they didn't intend for me to be their last witness. I raised the shotgun, bracing it against my injured shoulder despite the pain. My finger rested lightly on the trigger as another blow struck the door, wood cracking along the frame. "Last chance," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "Walk away now." Their response was another powerful hit that sent the table skidding backward. The door flew open several inches, enough for the thin man to wedge his knife through the gap, working to push the table further aside. I aimed at the opening and waited, forcing myself to breathe slowly. The next few seconds would determine everything. The door burst inward with a crash as both men put their weight against it, sending the table tumbling over. They rushed in together, the thin man leading with his knife extended, the heavier one right behind with the pipe raised high. Time seemed to slow. I saw every detail with preternatural clarity. The gleam of moonlight on the knife blade, the dark stains on the pipe that I now recognized as dried blood, the wild determination in their eyes. I squeezed the trigger. The shotgun's roar filled the small cabin, deafening in the enclosed space. The thin man took the blast directly in the chest, the force lifting him off his feet and throwing him backward into his partner. Both men crashed into the doorframe in a tangle of limbs. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the thin man slid to the floor, knife clattering from lifeless fingers, a dark stain spreading across his yellow jacket. His eyes stared upward, seeing nothing. The heavier man struggled to extricate himself, stunned by the sudden violence but apparently unharmed. He looked at his fallen companion, then at me, his face transforming with rage and disbelief. "You," he began, raising the pipe again. I pumped the shotgun, chambering the second shell, the sound cutting off whatever he'd been about to say. Our eyes met across the dead man's body. He saw something in mine that made him hesitate. I fired again, The second blast tore through the cabin wall as the heavier man dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the full force of the shot. Splinters and debris filled the air, along with the acrid smell of gunpowder. My ears rang painfully from the twin explosions in the confined space. A pained grunt told me I hadn't missed entirely. The heavier man staggered outside, one hand pressed to his side. I pumped the shotgun again, but realized with sinking dread that I had no more shells in the chamber. The remaining ammunition was still upstairs in the loft. For a heartbeat, I stood frozen, the empty weapon still raised. The thin man lay motionless by the door, a grim testament to what happens when flesh meets buckshot at close range. His blood pooled on my plank floor, black in the dim light. Outside, I heard labored breathing and muttered curses. The heavier man was wounded but alive, and now he knew I'd fired my last shot. I had seconds at most before he recovered enough to come at me again. I dropped the shotgun and grabbed the kitchen knife from the counter, a poor replacement but better than nothing. My injured arm throbbed mercilessly, the dish towel bandage now soaked through with blood. Lightheadedness threatened to overwhelm me as adrenaline battled blood loss. "You're dead," the man outside growled, his voice tight with pain. "You hear me? Fucking dead." I moved to the doorway, knife held before me, and peered cautiously into the darkness. The clearing around my cabin was washed in pale moonlight, shadows stretching long across the leaf-strewn ground. The heavier man had retreated to the edge of the trees, about 20 yards away. He stood hunched, one hand still clutched to his side, the other gripping the metal pipe. Blood stained his gray shirt in a spreading pattern. The shotgun pellets had caught him along the ribs. Not immediately fatal, but serious enough that he needed medical attention sooner rather than later. That knowledge didn't seem to have dampened his rage, however. His eyes, visible even in the darkness, burned with hatred. "You can't run," he said. "You know that, right? Even if you kill me, they'll find you." "They?" I echoed, the word slipping out before I could stop it. A grim smile twisted his features. "You think it's just us? You think we're alone out here?" He gestured vaguely toward the darkened forest. "There's more. Always more." Was he bluffing? Trying to rattle me? Or was there truth in his words? I thought about the dead hiker, about how methodically these two had tracked me. They weren't random killers. They had purpose, perhaps even organization. "The ranger station knows I'm here," I lied, keeping my voice steady. "They check on me weekly. They'll be coming soon." He laughed, a harsh sound that ended in a pained cough. "Nobody knows you're here, mountain man. Nobody cares. You disappeared from the world, remember? That's why you came out here, to vanish." The truth in his words stung worse than my wound. I had deliberately severed my connections to the outside world, left no forwarding address, maintained no regular contact with anyone. My isolation, once a comfort, now felt like a noose tightening around my neck. We stood at an impasse, him too injured to rush me too wounded to pursue him. The night stretched silent around us, indifferent to our bloody standoff. "Walk away," I said finally. "You're bleeding badly. Get help and I won't come after you." "Generous," he spat. "But we both know how this ends. One of us doesn't leave these woods." He straightened slightly, seeming to gather his strength. I tensed, preparing for another attack. But instead of charging, he backed further into the tree line, his form gradually blending with the shadows. "This isn't over." His voice floated back, already sounding fainter. "Not by a long shot." Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the forest that had been my sanctuary and now felt like a prison. I stood in the doorway for long minutes, straining to hear any sound of his return, but the night offered only the usual chorus of insects and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Finally, the shock began to wear off, and the full impact of what had happened hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back inside, careful to step around the dead man's body, and collapsed onto my cot. My hands shook uncontrollably as I unwrapped the blood-soaked towel from my arm to examine the damage. The knife wound was deep but clean, a straight slice about 4 inches long that had narrowly missed major blood vessels. It needed stitches, but I'd have to make do with what I had. I cleaned it as best I could with water and the bottle of whiskey I kept for medicinal purposes, biting down on a leather belt to keep from crying out as the alcohol scorched the open flesh. From my sparse medical supplies, I found butterfly bandages and wound closure strips. Not ideal, but they would have to suffice. I pulled the edges of the wound together, securing them with the strips, then wrapped the whole arm in clean bandaging, cinching it tight enough to control bleeding without cutting off circulation. My shoulder throbbed where the pipe had struck it, but nothing felt broken, just bruised muscle and perhaps a hairline fracture that would heal with time. I swallowed 2 ibuprofen tablets dry, knowing they'd hardly touch the pain, but needing to do something, anything, to maintain control. Only then did I allow myself to look at the dead man by my door. In death, he seemed smaller somehow, crumpled against the doorframe in an awkward pose, his yellow jacket now more red than yellow. His face was turned away, for which I was grateful. I'd seen enough death for one night. What was I supposed to do now? The obvious answer, call the police, wasn't an option for my isolated cabin. The nearest landline was at the gas station, 15 miles away through dark forest, with a wounded killer potentially waiting in the trees. Even if I made it, what would I say? That I'd killed a man in self-defense after finding a murder victim in the woods? That there might be others out there, as the heavier man had implied? I needed evidence. Something to corroborate my story when I eventually reported this nightmare to authorities. The hiker's backpack, the body by the creek, these would support my account, assuming the killers didn't return to remove them. A new urgency gripped me. I needed to document everything before anything changed. I lit several oil lamps, illuminating the cabin in a warm, flickering glow that made the blood look almost black against the wooden floor. I found my old digital camera in a drawer, rarely used but still functional, its battery holding enough charge for what I needed. I forced myself to photograph everything. The dead man and his knife, the damage to my door, my own injuries, the shotgun and spent shells. Each click of the shutter felt like another nail in a coffin, sealing away any chance I had of returning to my peaceful existence. When the grim task was complete, I faced my next dilemma. The body. I couldn't leave it where it lay, not with the potential for the wounded man to return with reinforcements, not with the autumn heat that would accelerate decomposition. But moving it seemed equally impossible. Where would I put it? How would I explain if I was caught in the act? In the end, practicality won out. I grabbed a tarp from my storage area, laid it beside the body, and with great effort, rolled the dead man onto it. His lifeless weight was shocking, so much heavier than a living person of the same size would be. I wrapped the tarp around him, securing it with rope, trying to distance myself mentally from what I was doing. I dragged the bundle outside to the small shed behind my cabin, clearing a space among my tools and supplies. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would have to do until morning when I could better assess my options. Back inside, I scrubbed at the bloodstains on the floor, knowing I could never remove them completely from the porous wood. The physical labor helped distract me from the throbbing pain in my arm and the chaos of my thoughts. What had I stumbled into? Who were these men, and why had they killed the hiker? The heavier man's implication that they weren't alone nagged at me, raising disturbing possibilities. Was there some kind of organized operation in these woods? Drug manufacturing, perhaps, or something even darker? As I cleaned, a terrible thought struck me. What if they knew who I was? What if they'd been watching my cabin for days or weeks, learning my routines, waiting for the right moment? The forest suddenly felt transparent, my every move exposed. I checked my windows, pulled down the few curtains I had, and extinguished all but one lamp. The darkness offered little comfort now, but at least it would hide me from watching eyes outside. Sleep was out of the question. I retrieved the remaining shotgun shells from the loft and reloaded the weapon, then positioned myself on a chair facing the door, determined to remain vigilant until dawn. The kitchen knife lay on the small table beside me, a backup I hoped not to need. Hours crawled by. Every creak of settling wood, every rustle of nocturnal animals outside sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Twice, I thought I heard footsteps and raised the shotgun, only to realize it was just the wind, or my own frayed nerves playing tricks. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, I allowed myself to believe I might have survived the night. The heavier man hadn't returned. Perhaps his wounds were more serious than I'd thought, or perhaps he decided I wasn't worth the risk. But the day ahead loomed with impossible choices. Should I hike out to report what happened, leaving my cabin unguarded? Should I try to find the hiker's body again, gathering more evidence? Or should I simply flee, abandoning everything I'd built here and disappearing deeper into the wilderness? As gray light filtered through my windows, I realized that no option led back to the life I'd known. Whatever I chose, everything had changed. The isolation I'd sought had become a trap, and the peace I'd found was shattered beyond repair. I checked my bandaged arm, wincing as I flexed my fingers. The bleeding had stopped, but infection remained a serious concern. I'd need antibiotics soon, another reason to risk the journey to civilization. The dawn chorus of birds began outside, a jarring normalcy against the horror of the night. I rose stiffly from my chair, muscles protesting after hours of tense immobility. My decision crystallized with the growing light. I would hike out, report everything, and face whatever consequences came. The alternative, living in fear, looking over my shoulder, wondering when they might return, was no life at all. I gathered essential supplies into a small backpack: water, food, the camera with its grim documentation, a change of bandages for my arm, and a crude map I'd drawn of the area, marking both my cabin and approximately where I'd found the hiker's body. The shotgun I would carry openly, illegal in the national forest under normal circumstances, but these were far from normal circumstances. As I stepped outside into the cool morning air, the forest appeared unchanged. Ancient trees standing sentinel, mist curling between their trunks, dew glistening on spider webs strung between branches. Beautiful and indifferent to the violence that had transpired beneath its canopy. I locked my cabin door out of habit, though the splintered frame rendered it largely symbolic. With one last look at the place I'd called home, I turned east toward the rising sun and the long walk back to the world I'd left behind. Whatever waited for me there couldn't be worse than what lurked in these woods. At least, that's what I told myself as I took the first steps of my journey, shotgun cradled in my arms, senses alert for any sound of pursuit. The truth, as I would soon discover, was far more complicated and far more terrifying than I could have imagined. The 15-mile hike to the gas station proved more arduous than I anticipated. My wounded arm throbbed with each heartbeat, a persistent reminder of the night's violence. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt hostile. Every shadow potentially concealing watchers, every snapping twig signaling pursuit. I kept the shotgun ready, its weight both a burden and a comfort as I followed faint trails eastward. By midday, fever had set in. My forehead burned while chills racked my body, clear signs of infection taking hold in my knife wound. The makeshift bandage had soaked through again, and when I paused to change it beside a small stream, the edges of the cut showed angry red inflammation. I cleaned it as best I could with stream water, applied my last antibiotic ointment, and rewrapped it with a fresh bandage from my pack. Just keep moving, I muttered to myself, the sound of my voice startling in the quiet forest. One foot in front of the other. The terrain grew steeper as I approached the ridgeline that separated my valley from the more traveled areas of the national forest. Climbing with one good arm proved challenging, and twice I slipped on loose shale, reopening my wound and adding scrapes and bruises to my growing collection of injuries. By late afternoon, I reached the fire road that would lead to Route 66 and civilization. The packed dirt track felt unnervingly exposed after hours in the dense forest cover. I quickened my pace despite my exhaustion, driven by the irrational fear that I was being watched from the tree line. The sun was setting when I finally spotted the weathered, clapboard structure of Roy's Gas and Grocery, its single pump and faded sign a surreal vision of normalcy after what I'd experienced. A battered pickup truck sat in the gravel lot. Roy's vehicle, I assumed, but no other cars were present. I hesitated at the edge of the forest, suddenly aware of how I must appear. Unshaven, filthy, bloody, carrying a shotgun and looking half wild. In my isolated life, I'd forgotten how frightening such an image would be to regular people. To avoid being shot on sight, I reluctantly stashed the shotgun in the underbrush, marking the location in my mind. I'd retrieve it later if needed. The bell above the door jingled as I entered the store. Roy looked up from his crossword puzzle, recognition slowly dawning on his weathered face. "Mountain man," he said. Then his eyes widened as he took in my condition. "What in God's name happened to you?" "I need to use your phone," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse and dehydration. "Need to call the police." Roy didn't ask questions. He led me behind the counter and pointed to an ancient rotary phone mounted on the wall. "You need an ambulance too, by the looks of it." I nodded gratefully and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher's voice sounded tinny and distant, a connection to a world that suddenly felt foreign. 911, what's your emergency? "My name is John Erskine," I began, the words tumbling out faster than I could organize them. I live in a cabin in the Allegheny National Forest. Yesterday evening, I found a dead body near my property. 2 men chased me. They tried to kill me. I shot one of them. The other got away wounded. A pause then. Sir, are you currently in danger? I don't think so. I'm at Roy's Gas and Grocery off Route 66, near the eastern forest boundary. Stay where you are, sir. I'm dispatching officers and an ambulance to your location. They should arrive in approximately 20 minutes. After I hung up, Roy guided me to a chair by the window, his face grave. He didn't press for details, just brought me a bottle of water and a first aid kit from behind the counter. Been telling you for years these woods ain't right, he said quietly as he helped me clean my wound properly. Some folks go in and never come out. I wanted to dismiss his words as the superstitious ramblings of a country store owner, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't. Instead, I asked, have there been others? Other disappearances? Roy shrugged. Official ones. A few hikers every couple years. Rangers say they got lost. Happens in wilderness areas. Unofficial ones. He glanced toward the darkening forest visible through the window. More than anyone knows. Before I could question him further, red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter as vehicles approached the store. The cavalry had arrived, though I had no idea if they'd believe my story or dismiss me as a paranoid hermit who'd cracked under the isolation. 2 state police cruisers pulled into the gravel lot, followed by an ambulance. Officers approached cautiously, hands near their holstered weapons, a reasonable precaution given the situation I'd described. The next few hours passed in a blur. Paramedics treated my arm, confirming my self-diagnosis of infection and administering IV antibiotics on site before transporting me to the regional hospital 30 miles away. State police detectives interviewed me in the emergency room, their expressions growing increasingly concerned as I detailed finding the hiker's body, the chase through the forest, and the deadly confrontation at my cabin. You say you left one assailant's body in your shed? Detective Mercer, a tall woman with short gray hair and skeptical eyes, asked. Yes, and I photographed everything. I pointed to my backpack, where the digital camera still waited with its grim evidence. The other man escaped, but he was wounded. Shotgun pellets caught him in the side. And you believe these men killed the hiker you found? I'm certain of it. They as much as admitted it when they came after me. Mercer exchanged glances with her partner, a younger man named Walsh, whose notepad was filled with my statement. Mr. Erskine, we'll need you to guide us back to your cabin and the location where you found the initial victim. When? As soon as the doctor clears you. We've already dispatched a forensics team to secure the area based on the coordinates you provided. I nodded, fighting against the exhaustion and medication that threatened to pull me under. There's something else. The one who got away, he implied they weren't alone. Said there were others. Walsh leaned forward. Others? Like what, some kind of group? I don't know, but he seemed confident, said they'll find you as if he was part of something larger. Mercer's expression darkened. We've had reports of unusual activity in the eastern section of the forest over the past year. Nothing concrete enough for an investigation, but concerning patterns. What kind of patterns? I asked. Missing hikers who were experienced outdoorsmen, evidence of unauthorized structures deep in restricted areas, unusual vehicle traffic on service roads with no clear purpose. She hesitated, then added, and reports from hunters about finding game that had been killed but not harvested, just left to rot with specific, ritual-like markings. A chill ran through me despite the hospital's warmth. Do you think there's some kind of cult operating out there? I wouldn't use that word officially, Mercer replied carefully. But unofficially, we're concerned about organized activity of an extreme nature, yes. The doctor interrupted then, insisting I needed rest before any forest expedition. The detectives reluctantly agreed to return in the morning, leaving an officer stationed outside my hospital room. For my protection, they assured me, though it felt equally like preventing my escape. Sleep came in fitful bursts, broken by nightmares of being chased through endless trees by faceless figures. I awoke before dawn, disoriented in the sterile hospital environment so different from my rustic cabin. By mid-morning, I'd been cleared for release, my arm properly stitched and bandaged, antibiotics coursing through my system via a portable IV drip the doctors insisted I continue for at least 48 hours. Detectives Mercer and Walsh returned with a forest ranger named Alvarez who would help navigate back to my cabin. The drive through the national forest felt surreal. Main roads gave way to service roads, then to the fire road I'd hiked out on the previous day. Finally, we reached the point where vehicles could go no further, and we continued on foot, following trails I knew by heart, but now saw through new eyes. "You really lived out here all alone?" Ranger Alvarez asked as we hiked, his tone somewhere between admiration and concern. "For almost 3 years," I replied. "Why?" The question came from Walsh, who'd been largely silent during the journey. I considered deflecting, but the events of the past 2 days had stripped away any pretense. I was running from something I couldn't face. Thought I'd find peace in isolation. "And did you?" Mercer asked. "Until 2 days ago? Yes, mostly." We fell silent after that, conserving energy for the hike. As we approached the creek where I'd first found the backpack, tension built within me. What if the body was gone? What if there was no evidence to support my story? My fears proved unfounded. The bright red backpack remained where I'd found it, though animals had scattered its contents further. And the hiker's body lay exactly as I'd left it, now covered with a light dusting of fallen leaves like nature's funeral shroud. Mercer crouched beside the dead man, her expression grim. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, defensive wounds on the hands. This was no accident. She spoke into her radio, summoning the forensics team that had been staging nearby. Within minutes, the quiet clearing became a hive of activity as technicians in blue jumpsuits photographed, measured, and collected evidence. We continued to my cabin, where a similar scene awaited. The thin man's body had been removed from my shed and lay wrapped in a body bag near a coroner's vehicle that had somehow navigated the rough terrain. Inside the cabin, technicians dusted for fingerprints and cataloged the blood spatter pattern from the shotgun blast. "Everything matches your statement, Mr. Erskine," Mercer acknowledged, a new respect in her voice. "But we still need to find the second assailant." "You think he's still out here? With those injuries?" "He would have needed medical attention. We've alerted hospitals in a 100-mile radius, but so far, nothing." I gazed around at the forest surrounding my small clearing, suddenly aware of how vast and impenetrable it truly was. If what he said is true about others, they might have their own medical supplies, their own facilities. Mercer nodded slowly. "That's our concern as well." Over the next week, my small cabin became the center of an expanding investigation. The dead hiker was identified as Gregory Voss, a 32-year-old environmental engineer from Pittsburgh who had been reported missing after failing to return from a weekend hike. The thin man I'd killed was identified through fingerprints as Wesley Simmons, 41, with a record of assault and suspected ties to extremist groups. I stayed at a motel in the nearest town, giving daily statements as investigators pieced together what had happened. They brought in specialists from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, experts in tracking organized violent groups operating in remote areas. 10 days after the incident, Mercer invited me to a briefing at the state police headquarters. A conference room had been transformed into an incident command center, with maps of the national forest covering one wall, marked with pins indicating known locations of interest. "We believe we've identified an encampment approximately 7 miles northwest of your cabin," Mercer explained, pointing to a red circle on the map. "Aerial surveillance shows evidence of structures and activity well outside permitted camping areas." "What kind of activity?" I asked. An FBI agent named Powell stepped forward. "Based on satellite imagery and thermal scanning, we estimate between 15 and 20 individuals. They've constructed semi-permanent shelters, dug waste pits, created what appears to be a defensive perimeter. Are they armed?" Powell nodded grimly. "Almost certainly. We've intercepted encrypted radio communications suggesting a well-organized group with military-style protocols." "Who are they?" Mercer exchanged glances with Powell before responding. "We believe they're part of a larger network called the Forest Brotherhood, an extremist survivalist group with apocalyptic beliefs. They see wilderness areas as the last bastion against what they consider societal collapse." "And they kill hikers?" I asked incredulously. "They kill anyone they consider a threat to their territory," Powell clarified. "Their ideology combines extreme anti-government views with nature worship and isolationism. They believe they're the rightful stewards of the forest." I thought about my own retreat from society, how I'd sought isolation as a refuge. Had I been unconsciously mimicking the very group that had nearly killed me? "What happens now?" I asked. "We're planning a coordinated operation to secure the encampment," Mercer said. "State police tactical units with FBI support. It's scheduled for tomorrow at dawn." "And me? What should I do?" Powell studied me with calculating eyes. That depends. Are you planning to return to your cabin? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought that far ahead, had been existing in a stunned day-to-day survival mode since the attack. I don't know, I admitted. Can I? Physically, yes. Once the investigation concludes, the property remains yours. But psychologically? Powell shrugged. That's something only you can decide. That night, alone in my sterile motel room with its buzzing fluorescent lights and paper-thin walls, I faced the question head-on. Could I return to my solitary existence after what had happened? Would the forest ever feel like sanctuary again? Or would every shadow hide potential threats, every unexpected sound trigger memories of that night? More importantly, should I return? My retreat to isolation had been a response to trauma, a way of avoiding responsibility and human connection. It had felt like wisdom at the time, but now I wondered if it had just been elaborate cowardice. Dawn broke with the sound of helicopter rotors passing overhead. The operation against the Forest Brotherhood encampment was underway. I watched through my window as military-style vehicles rolled through town, heading toward the national forest. Hours later, Mercer called to report success. 12 members of the group had been arrested without casualties. Others had escaped deeper into the wilderness but were being tracked. Among those captured was the heavier man from that night, still recovering from his shotgun wounds. His name was Russell Blackwell, a former Army Ranger discharged for disciplinary reasons who had been with the Forest Brotherhood for at least 3 years. He's talking, Mercer told me, trying to cut a deal. Says the group has killed at least 7 people who ventured too close to their territory over the past year. Was I a target? I asked. Did they know about me before I found the hiker? According to Blackwell, they knew about your cabin but considered you a kindred spirit, someone else who'd rejected society. They left you alone until you witnessed them with Voss's body. The irony wasn't lost on me. My isolation had both protected and endangered me, marking me as similar to the killers while simultaneously making me vulnerable when they turned on me. A week later, after giving final statements and signing countless documents, I returned to my cabin with a police escort. The crime scene tape had been removed, but evidence of the investigation remained. Boot prints in the dirt, fingerprint powder on surfaces, the lingering smell of chemicals used to detect blood traces. The officers offered to stay while I gathered personal belongings, assuming I wouldn't want to remain. I thanked them, but declined. I needed to be alone with the place, to feel whether it was still home or simply the scene of a nightmare. After they left, I stood in the center of my small clearing as evening approached. The forest stretched around me, ancient trees indifferent to the human drama that had played out beneath them. Birds called, squirrels chattered, leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, the eternal conversation of the woodland continuing as it had for centuries. I walked the perimeter of my property, touching familiar trees, noting how quickly nature had begun reclaiming the areas disturbed by the investigation. Near the creek where I'd found Voss's body, wildflowers had already started growing over the trampled ground. Inside the cabin, I lit a fire in the wood stove and sat before it on my simple wooden chair. The bloodstains had been cleaned from the floor, the broken door repaired by the forensics team after they finished their work. Yet the space felt irreparably altered, as if the violence had seeped into the very logs. As darkness fell, I made my decision. This chapter of my life had ended the moment I found that backpack by the creek. Staying would mean living with ghosts, both literal and metaphorical, and perpetuating a retreat from life that had proven more dangerous than healing. The next morning I began packing the few possessions I wanted to keep. My grandfather's pocket watch, journals I'd kept during my time here, tools handed down through generations. The rest, furniture, supplies, the structure itself, I would leave behind, perhaps for another seeker who needed temporary refuge but not permanent escape. 2 weeks later, I signed paperwork donating the cabin and surrounding acre to a wilderness education program for troubled youth. The irony felt appropriate. What had been my hiding place would become a place of growth and reconnection for others. I moved to a small town on the edge of the forest, close enough to visit the woods on day hikes but firmly within the realm of community and connection. I found work as a carpenter's assistant, using skills honed during my solitary years for something productive. In the evenings, I began writing about my experiences, first as therapy, then as something that might help others understand the fine line between healthy solitude and dangerous isolation. Sometimes at night, I still dream of that evening. Finding the body, the chase through darkening woods, the desperate struggle in my cabin. I wake with my heart pounding, sheets damp with sweat, momentarily disoriented until the sound of distant traffic or a neighbor's radio grounds me in the present. But those episodes grow less frequent with time. What remains more persistent is a heightened awareness of shadows in peripheral vision, of subtle changes in forest sounds, of the capacity for darkness that exists in isolated minds. The investigation into the Forest Brotherhood continued for months, uncovering a network that stretched across multiple national forests in the eastern United States. More arrests followed. More evidence of killings emerged. I testified at several trials, facing Russell Blackwell across courtrooms as he glared at me with undimmed hatred. During the final trial, he spoke directly to me during his statement to the court. "You think you've escaped, but you're still one of us. Still a man who ran from the world. The only difference is you ran back when things got hard." His words haunted me, containing just enough truth to sting. But over time, I recognized the fundamental difference between us. I had sought isolation to heal, while he and his brotherhood had sought it to nurture hatred and violence. My retreat had been a temporary shelter. Theirs was a fortress built to wage war. Now, 3 years since that blood-soaked night, I walk in the forest with open eyes, neither fearing its depths nor idealizing its solitude. The woods are neither malevolent nor benevolent. They simply are, vast and ancient and indifferent to human concerns. They can shelter both the healer and the killer, the seeker and the lost. I no longer live alone, but I haven't forgotten what solitude taught me, that we need both connection and space, community and individuality, to be fully human. The forest remains a part of my life, but as a place I visit rather than a place I hide. Sometimes, on clear autumn days when the leaves begin to turn, I hike near my old cabin. The education program has maintained it well, adding solar panels and improving the water collection system. Young voices echo where once there was only silence, learning the names of trees and the habits of wildlife, discovering that nature can be both teacher and healer. I never stay long, never visit after dusk. Some memories are best left undisturbed, like the leaves that cover the forest floor, gradually decomposing to nourish new growth. The past remains, feeding the present, but no longer defining it. As I turn to leave, I sometimes pause at the ridge overlooking the small valley where I once made my solitary home. The forest stretches in all directions, beautiful and mysterious and complex, much like the human heart that seeks both connection and solitude, safety and risk, retreat and return. I take a deep breath of pine-scented air, adjust my pack, and head back toward town, toward light and noise and the messy miracle of human community. The path leads forward, not back. And despite everything, I wouldn't have it any other way. I never considered myself someone who collected dolls. Throughout my childhood, toys held little fascination for me. While other girls my age accumulated stuffed animals and plastic figurines, I found myself drawn to books and outdoor adventures. The few toys I did own could easily be counted on both hands, and by the time I turned 14, I had given most away to younger cousins in the family. The larger of my 2 porcelain dolls came into my possession when I was 10 years old, a birthday gift from my closest friend, Jade. We had been inseparable since first grade, sharing secrets and spending countless afternoons exploring the woods behind my house. The doll arrived in an ornate box, its face hauntingly lifelike with pale, unblemished skin and deep, almost iridescent blue eyes that seemed to shift color depending on how the light hit them. "This isn't just any doll," my grandmother informed me after the birthday party had ended. She held it carefully, her weathered hands contrasting with the doll's pristine features. "Porcelain dolls like this one are collector's items. They're meant to be displayed, not played with." I nodded, somewhat indifferent at the time. The doll wore an elaborate Victorian-style dress of deep burgundy with intricate lace details and a matching wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across its face when positioned just so. I placed it on my dresser, where it remained largely forgotten as I continued my ordinary 10-year-old life. The smaller doll joined my reluctant collection approximately 2 years later as an Easter gift from my grandmother. Unlike its counterpart, this doll featured softer features, rosy cheeks, a gentle smile, and light brown hair arranged in perfect ringlets. My 2 sisters received identical dolls that Easter morning, though theirs mysteriously disappeared within months. Whether lost during our frequent relocations or deliberately misplaced due to growing discomfort, neither sister seemed particularly troubled by their absence. I've now had these dolls for nearly 12 years. I'm 24 as I document these experiences, having carried these porcelain companions through 3 different homes, 2 college dormitories, and now my first apartment. During this time, I've accumulated a series of incidents that I can no longer dismiss as coincidence or imagination. What follows is my attempt to chronicle these events in the hope that committing them to paper might provide some clarity, or at the very least, a record should the occurrences continue to escalate. Our log cabin home sat nestled against the edge of dense woodland, the kind of picturesque rural setting that appears idyllic in daylight, but transforms into something altogether more sinister after sunset. We had lived there approximately 3 years when my sisters came to live with us following my parents' separation. The adjustment period was challenging as we established new routines and boundaries. The cabin's rustic charm extended to creaking floorboards and settling noises that became the soundtrack of our nights. At first, we attributed every unexpected sound to the natural movements of an aging wooden structure. However, certain occurrences defied such rational explanations. The first incident I can recall with absolute clarity happened during a thunderstorm in late autumn. Power outages were common in our remote location, so we had gathered in the living room with flashlights and candles, telling ghost stories to pass the time. My younger sister Irene, 13 at the time, had just finished recounting a particularly chilling tale when the conversation turned to items in our home that made them uncomfortable. "That porcelain doll on your dresser," Irene said, her voice lowering instinctively. "The way it watches from under that hat. I can't stand being alone in your room with it." My middle sister Vanessa nodded in agreement. "Every time I walk past your room, I feel like it's following me with its eyes." I laughed dismissively. "It's just a doll. It's not even particularly well made. Most of its eyelashes have fallen off." "Would you mind pushing the hat down over its face when we're home?" Irene asked. "Just so it isn't looking at us." To humor them, I agreed, though I found their concern amusing. I had owned the larger doll for nearly 4 years by then, and had never felt anything unsettling about it. My more spiritually inclined friend Renee had once suggested that perhaps the dolls had formed some attachment to me as their owner. This explanation seemed fanciful, but harmless. That night, after the power returned and my sisters had fallen asleep, I sat at my desk completing homework. From the corner of my eye, I noticed something unusual. The doll's hat had shifted slightly, exposing one glazed eye that seemed to be angled directly toward me. I distinctly remembered pushing the hat down as promised, making sure both eyes were completely covered. Dismissing it as a result of the house settling, or perhaps my own imperfect memory, I approached the doll and readjusted its hat. As my fingers brushed against the porcelain face, I noted with surprise that it felt unusually warm to the touch, almost as if it retained body heat. The scientific part of my mind immediately sought explanations. Perhaps it had been sitting near my reading lamp, absorbing heat from the bulb. I returned to my homework, but found myself unable to concentrate, repeatedly glancing back at the doll on my dresser. That night, for the first time, I turned it to face the wall before going to sleep. In the following weeks, I began noticing small irregularities. Items on my dresser would be slightly rearranged. The doll's hat would be raised, despite my consistent efforts to keep it lowered. Once, I returned from school to find the doll had rotated approximately 45 degrees from its previous position. When I mentioned these observations casually to my grandmother, she dismissed them with practical explanations: the house settling, drafts from the poorly sealed windows, or perhaps my sisters entering my room despite our agreement about personal space. These explanations satisfied me temporarily, but couldn't account for what happened next. Within months of moving in, both of my sisters had developed elaborate rituals before entering my bedroom. Irene would knock 3 times, call my name, and wait for a response before crossing the threshold. Vanessa refused to enter unless I was physically present in the room. When questioned about these behaviors, both admitted their discomfort stemmed from the porcelain dolls. "They watch us," Vanessa explained one evening as we prepared dinner together. "Not just the way normal dolls seem to stare. They actively track movement." "That's impossible," I countered, slicing vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. "They're inanimate objects." "Then why do you always find the hat raised when you've pushed it down?" she challenged. "And why does the smaller one always end up facing the door, no matter which way you position it?" I had no satisfactory answer, having noticed these phenomena myself, but dismissed them as coincidence or faulty memory. The following weekend, Irene approached me with an unusually serious expression. "Something happened yesterday when you were at swim practice," she began, fidgeting with her bracelet. "I needed to borrow your graphing calculator for math homework. I called for Grandma, but she was in the garden and couldn't hear me." She paused, seeming to gather courage before continuing. "I stood at your doorway for almost 5 minutes, trying to work up the nerve to go in alone. The larger doll was on your dresser where it always is, but something felt different. The atmosphere in your room felt pressurized somehow, like the air before a severe storm." Irene described how she finally entered, keeping her eyes averted from the dresser as she moved toward my desk. I found the calculator and turned to leave, but something compelled me to look at the doll. The hat was raised completely, and I absolutely swear, its head had turned to follow my movement across the room. She had dropped the calculator and fled downstairs, refusing to return to the second floor until our grandmother or I was home. When I checked later, the calculator lay on the floor precisely where she claimed to have dropped it, and the doll sat on the dresser with its hat fully raised, though I had lowered it before leaving that morning. That night, I conducted a simple experiment. Before going to bed, I positioned both dolls facing the wall, measuring the exact distance between them and marking their positions with small strips of tape on the dresser surface. I took photographs with my phone to document their arrangement. When I woke the next morning, the smaller doll remained in position, but the larger one had rotated approximately 30 degrees toward my bed. The tape marker remained in place, indicating the doll had moved without disturbing its base. I checked my phone. The photograph confirmed my memory wasn't faulty. Something had shifted the doll's position during the night. The summer I turned 17, I traveled to Florida to stay with relatives for 6 weeks. Before leaving, I made special arrangements for my dolls at my sister's insistence. I placed the larger doll facing my bed with its hat pulled down completely over its face. The smaller doll I positioned on a bookshelf, facing away from the room entirely. My sisters shared the large bedroom with me in our log cabin home, a spacious area that accommodated 3 full-sized beds, a futon, television, and 3 dressers with room to spare. Despite sharing this space, they requested these specific arrangements to ensure their comfort during my absence. 2 weeks into my trip, I received a disturbing phone call from Vanessa. Her voice trembled as she recounted what had occurred earlier that day. "I was coming up the stairs to get my laptop charger," she began, her words rushing together. "You know how the staircase has that landing where you can see into our room through the banister? Well, I was about halfway up when I glanced over." She paused, and I could hear her taking deep breaths to steady herself. "The larger doll was sitting on your dresser, facing the staircase directly. Its hat was completely raised, and its head, I swear this is true, was angled downward as if it was watching me climb the stairs. I know exactly how we left it before you left. Irene and I both made sure of it." Vanessa described how she had frozen on the stairs, unable to continue upward or retreat back down for several terrifying seconds. When she finally regained control of her limbs, she raced back down to the kitchen where our grandmother was preparing lunch. "The worst part," she continued, "is what Irene told me afterward. She swears that 2 days ago she found the doll sitting on your bed, partially covered by your blankets as if it had crawled under them itself. She put it back on the dresser, fixed the hat, and didn't tell me because she thought I'd done it as a prank." This revelation disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. My grandmother, ever practical, suggested that perhaps one of them had moved the doll subconsciously or forgotten doing so. When I returned home 3 weeks later, I found the larger doll exactly where Vanessa described, on the dresser, facing outward, with its hat raised to expose its glass eyes. The smaller doll, however, had disappeared entirely from the bookshelf. After a thorough search, I discovered it inside my closet, nestled between winter sweaters that hadn't been touched in months. That night, I experienced something that confirmed my sister's experiences weren't mere imagination. I awoke around 3 in the morning to the distinct sensation of being watched. The moonlight filtering through my curtains provided just enough illumination to make out shapes in the darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with growing horror that both dolls now sat at the foot of my bed, their pale faces turned toward me. I remained perfectly still, convinced I must be dreaming or experiencing sleep paralysis. I forced myself to close my eyes and count slowly to 100. When I opened them again, the dolls had returned to their original positions, the larger one on the dresser, the smaller on the bookshelf. In the morning, I dismissed the incident as a particularly vivid nightmare. Yet the lingering doubt remained, intensified by the discovery of a small tear in my comforter precisely where I had seen the dolls sitting in my supposed dream. 2 years later, my family relocated to a modern 2-story home across town. The move represented a fresh start for all of us, away from the creaking floors and drafty windows of the log cabin. My bedroom in the new house was smaller but brighter, with large windows that eliminated the shadowy corners I had grown accustomed to. For the first time, I seriously considered not bringing the porcelain dolls. They sat in a moving box for nearly 3 weeks after we'd settled in, until guilt, or perhaps some inexplicable sense of obligation, compelled me to unpack them. I arranged them on a wooden bookshelf near my door, positioning them between novels so they appeared more like casual decorations than focal points. My grandmother, who lived with us, seemed relieved by the new home's solid construction and absence of unexplained noises. The first month passed uneventfully, leading us all to relax into our new routines. I had been accepted to a nearby university and was preparing for my freshman year, spending long hours studying and rarely paying attention to the dolls. One morning in early autumn, my grandmother approached me during breakfast with an unusual question. "Did you hear someone knocking in your room last night?" she asked, stirring her tea with unnecessary focus. "No," I replied, confused. "I slept through the night. Why?" She described waking around 2:30 a.m. to the distinct sound of knocking. Not gentle tapping, but deliberate, forceful impacts, as if someone were pounding a fist against wood. The sound had come from the direction of my bedroom, she was certain. "I thought perhaps your mini-fridge was malfunctioning," she continued. "Sometimes they make that knocking sound when the compressor is failing." Concerned, I checked the mini-fridge immediately after breakfast, but it was functioning perfectly. No unusual sounds or temperature issues. I inspected my entire room carefully, but found nothing that could explain the knocking my grandmother had heard. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, I was studying late in the living room when my grandmother appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "There's that knocking again," she whispered. "Coming from your room." Together we walked upstairs, but as we approached my bedroom, the sound abruptly ceased. My door stood partially open, exactly as I had left it. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. The porcelain dolls sat on their shelf, their glassy eyes reflecting the hallway light. My grandmother, always practical and skeptical of supernatural explanations, suggested we check the attic access panel in the ceiling outside my room, thinking perhaps an animal had become trapped. We found nothing. She then proposed the knocking might be coming from the pipes within the walls, though the plumber who inspected them the following day found no issues. The knocking occurred twice more during the following week, always when I wasn't in my room and always stopping before I could reach the source. On the 5th occurrence, something different happened. My grandmother heard the now familiar pounding and immediately called for me. I sprinted upstairs, determined to catch whatever was causing the disturbance. As I reached the top step, I heard it clearly. 3 distinct knocks against wood, followed by silence, then 3 more. The sound emanated unquestionably from my bedroom. I pushed the door open fully and flipped on the light. The room appeared exactly as I had left it, with one exception. The smaller porcelain doll lay on the floor beneath the bookshelf, as if it had fallen or been thrown. Its tiny porcelain hand rested against the wooden baseboard, precisely the spot from which the knocking seemed to originate. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew to be possible. My grandmother appeared behind me, her breath catching as she observed the scene. "It must have fallen," she said finally, her voice strained. "The shelf might be uneven." I nodded mutely and entered the room to retrieve the doll. As I lifted it, I noticed something that made my stomach constrict. A small chip in its porcelain hand, fresh and sharp-edged, revealing the chalky white material beneath the glazed surface. The location of the chip aligned perfectly with where it would strike the baseboard if used to knock. That night, I packed both dolls carefully in a storage container and placed them in the back of my closet. Neither my grandmother nor I mentioned the incident again, as if by mutual, unspoken agreement. For several weeks, our home remained blissfully quiet at night. During my freshman year of college, I returned home primarily for holidays and occasional weekends. The dolls remained sealed in their container in my closet, undisturbed and largely forgotten as I adapted to campus life. My sisters had both moved out by then, Vanessa to attend a university on the opposite coast, and Irene to live with our father in another state. The Christmas break of my sophomore year brought an unexpected visitor to our home. Rebecca, a childhood friend who had moved away during middle school, had returned to town to visit relatives. Having reconnected through social media, she eagerly accepted my invitation for dinner at our house. The evening progressed pleasantly with conversation and reminiscing until Rebecca mentioned hearing about those creepy dolls from mutual friends. My grandmother tensed visibly across the table, but I laughed it off, explaining that my sisters had always been unnecessarily frightened by perfectly ordinary porcelain dolls. "I'd love to see them," Rebecca said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "I've always been fascinated by supposedly haunted objects." Reluctantly, I led her upstairs to my bedroom. The storage container remained untouched in my closet, gathering dust. I hesitated before opening it, surprised by my own reluctance. Rebecca watched eagerly as I removed the lid and carefully unwrapped the tissue paper surrounding the larger doll. Its face emerged from the wrappings, the painted features somehow more vivid than I remembered. The blue eyes caught the light, creating the illusion of depth where none should exist. Rebecca gasped appreciatively, reaching out to touch the fabric of its dress. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Can I take a picture to show my mom? She collects antique dolls." I nodded absently, distracted by the smaller doll still nestled in tissue paper. Something about its position seemed wrong, though I couldn't immediately identify what bothered me. As Rebecca positioned her phone to photograph the larger doll, I realized what had caught my attention. The smaller doll's head had rotated within its wrappings, its face now pressed against the transparent plastic of the container as if peering outward. "Wait until I take it out completely," I said, reaching for the larger doll to position it better for the photograph. As I lifted it from the container, the hat fell back, exposing its face entirely. Rebecca aimed her phone and tapped the screen to focus. Suddenly, she jerked backward, nearly dropping her phone in the process. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice high with alarm. "See what?" Its eyes. They moved. Just as I took the picture, they flicked to the side, looking directly at the camera. I dismissed her claim immediately. "That's impossible. It's a fixed porcelain doll." Rebecca thrust her phone toward me, her hand trembling slightly. "Look at the picture. Tell me what you see." The photograph showed the doll held in my hands, its face clearly visible. What struck me was the direction of its gaze. While I remembered its eyes facing forward as they always had, in the image they were undeniably shifted toward the camera lens, creating the unsettling impression of direct eye contact with the viewer. "It's just the angle," I said firmly, though doubt crept through me. Or maybe a reflection on the glass eyes. Rebecca wasn't convinced. She insisted on taking another photograph, this time recording a short video as well. In the second image, the doll's eyes appeared normal, facing forward as expected. The video showed nothing unusual, just a porcelain doll held in my increasingly unsteady hands. After Rebecca left that evening, I examined the dolls more carefully. The smaller one had indeed shifted position within its wrappings, though I had sealed the container months ago and it had remained undisturbed in my closet. The larger doll's eyes appeared normal now, but I couldn't dismiss what I'd seen in the photograph. Against my better judgment, I decided to place them on my desk rather than return them to storage. Perhaps constant observation would provide answers to questions I had been avoiding for years. That night, I awoke to the sound of something scratching gently against wood. Keeping my breathing steady and my eyes nearly closed, I scanned the darkened room. The dolls remained on my desk, their outlines visible in the faint glow from my alarm clock. As I watched through half-lidded eyes, the scratching sound came again. The larger doll's arm moved, a tiny, almost imperceptible motion. Its porcelain hand dragged across the wooden surface of the desk, creating the scratching noise I had heard. I remained perfectly still, fear constricting my throat as I witnessed what should have been impossible. The doll's head rotated slowly until its eyes fixed on my position in the bed. Though I couldn't make out its expression clearly in the darkness, I felt with absolute certainty that it was aware of my consciousness. After what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, I summoned the courage to reach for my bedside lamp. The instant light flooded the room. All movement ceased. Both dolls sat innocently on the desk, positioned exactly as I had left them before going to sleep. The following morning, I examined the desk surface carefully, finding 3 tiny scratch marks in the wood where the doll's hand had rested. The incidents grew more frequent after Rebecca's visit, as if her acknowledgement of the doll's strange properties had somehow emboldened them. I returned to university after the holiday break with a mixture of relief and guilt, having once again sealed the dolls in their container and placed them in my closet. My junior year brought new challenges and distractions that pushed thoughts of the dolls to the periphery of my consciousness. I moved into an off-campus apartment with 2 roommates, immersed myself in my studies, and began an internship that consumed most of my free time. For nearly 8 months, I managed to visit home only briefly, never staying overnight. When summer arrived, however, financial necessity required me to move back into my childhood bedroom temporarily. The storage container remained undisturbed in my closet, exactly where I had left it. For the first week, I avoided opening it, telling myself I had outgrown such childish fears. My grandmother noticed my avoidance but said nothing until one evening when we sat alone on the back porch, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. "They've been active while you were gone," she said quietly, not needing to specify what "they" referred to. I turned to her in surprise. My grandmother had always been the voice of reason, offering logical explanations for every strange occurrence. Her acknowledgement of the doll's activity represented a significant departure from her usual pragmatism. "What happened?" I asked, uncertain if I truly wanted to know. She sighed, her gaze fixed on the darkening yard. "The knocking returned about 2 months after you left. Always from your closet, always 3 distinct knocks followed by silence, then 3 more. I ignored it at first." She described how, after several weeks of this pattern, she had finally entered my room and opened the closet, finding the storage container exactly as I had left it. When she removed the lid, however, both dolls were positioned differently than I had placed them, sitting upright, facing the closet door as if waiting for it to open. "I told myself I was being foolish," she continued, "that you must have positioned them that way before leaving. But I know you didn't." What followed was a detailed account of increasingly disturbing events. My grandmother described finding the closet door open on multiple occasions, despite having closed it securely. She mentioned items in my room being rearranged, books removed from shelves, desk drawers partially opened, my bedspread disturbed as if someone had sat on its edge. "The last incident happened just 3 days before you came home," she said, her voice dropping to near a whisper. "I was awakened by what sounded like footsteps in your room. Light, careful steps moving from the closet to your bed and back again. I gathered my courage and opened your door without warning, turning on the light immediately." My grandmother's hands trembled slightly as she described what she had seen, the larger doll sitting on my pillow, the smaller one positioned at the foot of the bed. The storage container in the closet stood open, its lid on the floor beside it. "I convinced myself I must have checked the container earlier and forgotten to secure it properly," she said. "That perhaps the house settling had caused the dolls to fall into those positions. But deep down, I knew better." That night, after my grandmother had gone to bed, I approached my closet with determined steps. The time for avoidance had passed. I opened the door and knelt before the storage container, removing its lid slowly. Both dolls lay wrapped in tissue paper, positioned horizontally as one would expect. Nothing appeared unusual or disturbed. I unwrapped them carefully, examining each for signs of damage or alteration. Finding nothing, I made a decision. I placed both dolls on my dresser, positioning them side by side facing my bed. Then I took out my phone and opened a time-lapse recording application. I set the phone on my bookshelf, aimed toward the dresser, and programmed it to capture one frame every 30 seconds throughout the night. With this surveillance in place, I went to bed, leaving a small lamp illuminated to ensure the camera would capture any movement. Despite my exhaustion, sleep evaded me for hours as I periodically opened my eyes to check the dolls' positions. They remained motionless until I finally drifted off around 2 in the morning. The harsh sound of my alarm woke me at 7. Sunlight streamed through my curtains, casting the room in a warm glow that seemed to contradict the uneasiness I felt. My first glance confirmed what I both expected and dreaded. The dolls had moved. The larger one now stood at the edge of the dresser, its porcelain hand extended outward as if reaching toward my bed. The smaller doll had rotated completely, its back now facing the room. With trembling fingers, I retrieved my phone and opened the time-lapse recording. The footage began normally, showing the dolls positioned as I had left them. For the first 2 hours, nothing changed. Then, at approximately 1:42 a.m., according to the timestamp, the smaller doll's head rotated slowly, a movement that should have been physically impossible given its fixed porcelain construction. At 2:17 a.m., the larger doll began to move. Unlike the smaller one's subtle shift, this movement was more pronounced. It appeared to lift itself incrementally, using tiny, jerking motions to change its position until it stood at the dresser's edge, arm extended. The recording continued until morning, showing no further movement after the dolls reached the positions in which I found them. I replayed the footage 3 times, searching for signs of manipulation or natural explanation. Finding none, I was forced to confront the reality I had been avoiding for years. The dolls moved on their own. I am 24 now, sitting in my first solo apartment with both porcelain dolls displayed on a shelf across from my desk. After years of unexplained phenomena, I have reached an unusual arrangement with these inanimate yet somehow conscious objects. Following the recorded evidence of their movement, I spent months researching similar accounts, consulting with collectors of antique dolls, and even meeting discreetly with a paranormal investigator recommended by Rebecca. None provided satisfactory explanations for what I had experienced and documented. The paranormal investigator suggested the dolls might host attachments, spirits or energies bound to the physical objects for reasons unknown. She recommended destroying them to sever the connection. The doll collector warned that breaking porcelain dolls was considered deeply unlucky in multiple cultures, potentially releasing whatever essence they contained. My grandmother, in a surprising departure from her lifelong skepticism, suggested a third option. They've never harmed you, she pointed out. Their activities increase when you're absent or ignoring them, but remain relatively benign when you acknowledge their presence. This observation aligned with my own experiences. The most dramatic incidents had occurred during periods when I had stored the dolls away or left home for extended periods. When displayed openly and treated with a certain degree of acknowledgement, their activities diminished in frequency and intensity. So began our strange coexistence. I keep the dolls displayed prominently in whatever space I inhabit. Each morning, I acknowledge them verbally, a simple greeting that feels both ridiculous and necessary. When traveling, I inform them of my departure date and expected return, placing them in positions facing the door as if awaiting my return. In exchange, their movements have become more subtle and less frequent. Objects in my apartment remain undisturbed. The knocking has ceased entirely. Occasionally, I still find them in slightly altered positions, particularly after mentioning them to others or writing about them as I am doing now. As I complete this account, I notice the smaller doll has rotated slightly to face the computer screen. The larger one remains in position, though its hat has raised just enough to expose its glass eyes. I feel their attention focused on my words, perhaps curious about how their story will be told. I have accepted that I may never understand what animates these porcelain figures. Perhaps they contain energies beyond scientific explanation. Perhaps long years of projected emotions and fears have somehow manifested in physical movement. Perhaps there is a perfectly rational explanation that continues to elude me. What I know with certainty is that destroying them feels wrong, not merely out of superstition, but from a deeper sense that they are, in their way, attached to me as their caretaker. They have followed me through childhood into adulthood, witnessing my development with their unchanging porcelain faces. In strange moments of honesty with myself, I acknowledge that I would miss their presence if they were gone. So we continue our unusual relationship, these watching dolls and I. They remain mostly still when observed, coming alive in the periphery of my attention or during the unguarded hours of night. I maintain my rituals of acknowledgement, treating them with a respect that feels earned rather than irrational. Sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, I awaken to find the larger doll has moved closer to my bedside. Its painted face reveals nothing, but I sense something almost protective in its posture. As if having attached itself to me, it now stands guard against other, less familiar entities that might wish me harm. Good morning, I say to them now as I prepare to end this writing session. Thank you for letting me share your story. The air in my apartment feels momentarily heavy, then settles. Outside my window, the world continues its normal rhythms, unaware of the small, inexplicable reality we have created here. I save this document and close my laptop, turning to face my porcelain companions directly. Their glass eyes reflect the afternoon light, revealing nothing and everything about our shared history. I no longer fear what I don't understand. Some mysteries, I have learned, are best left unexamined too closely, respected from a careful distance, acknowledged but not disturbed. And so we watch each other, these dolls and I, neither fully understanding the other, but having reached a form of peace in our mutual observation. Sometimes I wonder who is really the watcher and who is being watched. Perhaps in the end, it doesn't matter. We have found our equilibrium in this strange, unspoken arrangement, and for now, that seems enough.